And I think it will be appropriate for us to begin our meeting by standing in silence for 72 seconds as we remember all those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Would everybody please stand? Thank you. Members just arriving may have seen that the Ukrainian flag is flying on the flagpole outside the town hall as a mark of solidarity with the people of Ukraine. On Sunday, I attended a multi-faith vigil in the town hall square, and it was very moving to see people right across the borough come to that vigil to pay their respects. And our thoughts are especially with residents in this borough from the Ukraine who have relatives or friends back in the Ukraine. And I think we will remember them in our speeches tonight and remember them in our thoughts tonight and pray for peace. Thank you. Item 1, minutes. Minutes of the meeting on the Council held on the 1st of December and the 26th of January. 2 sets of minutes have been circulated, and it is your wish that I sign them as correct records. Thank you very much. As this is the Council budget meeting this evening, we devote half an hour to public contributions. But before we move to those sessions of the agenda, there's a couple of items we need to go through. So I now ask the Chief Executive to report apologies for absence or lateness to this meeting.
Apologies of absence have been received from Councillors Nail, Councillor Press, Councillor Rossi and Councillor El Naghi. I don't know if there are any other apologies from whips. No.
I think we've got late absence from Dr. Chown and from Councillor Chown and Councillor Round.
Thank you.
Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary or other significant interest in any item being considered at tonight's meeting? That should have been the Chief Executive. I do beg your pardon. It's my last full meeting. I'm getting excited. Chief Executive, would you like to carry on?
Yeah. With regards to the report on the annual review of councillor allowances in the Administration Committee, all members present in the chamber will be deemed as having declared a personal interest. Is that agreed? And does any member wish to make a declaration pursuant to Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, which relates to members' council tax payments and the ability of members to vote on matters this evening relating to the level of or calculation of council tax or the arrangements for administering council tax? Thank you.
Thank you. So the Council is providing up to half an hour at this budget meeting to allow residents to speak on any matter of local interest or concern. Susan Ritchie is here to facilitate this part of the meeting, so I now shall hand over to her.
Everyone, we've got three very different in which the first one's going to be kicked off by Chris Naults, who's asking a question about tech startups wanting to come into the borough.
Thank you, Susan, and hello everybody. Thank you for having me. I think it's a rather wonderful tradition that I can just come here and ask questions. I'm a dual citizen, as you can probably hear from my accent. I became a British citizen a few months ago, but I'm very happy to be able to do this. By background, I'm a serial tech entrepreneur and investor, and I've built and run companies in Israel, the US, the UK, and China. So I wondered what support, if... Have you heard anything, or shall I just...
Mr. Carver.
Okay. So I'll keep my thank you short. So my thank you was first... No, you can still not hear me? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, didn't come with the instruction. I needed to lean into this. But anyways, it's a tech problem indeed. So thank you for the third time for having this wonderful tradition to be able to speak here. I am a dual citizen, as I'm sure you now can all hear. The accent is Belgian. I became a British citizen just before Christmas. So again, great to be able to do this. By background, I'm a serial tech entrepreneur and investor, and I built and ran companies in Israel, China, US, and indeed UK. So my question to the council is, what support, if any, does the council provide for founders and tech startups in the borough who are either based here or who would consider basing themselves here? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and asking that question. And you're obviously a resident here because you're speaking. And I do hope that you've also got a tech company here in the borough, because we really do welcome, and obviously we'd love to welcome more tech companies in the borough. And so, you know, do come and talk to us in your own capacity as well. But what can the council do? Well, I'm sure you're aware that already on Kensington High Street, there is the Founders Factory, which is a really an amazing community of tech startups. A lot of incubator companies are bubbling away in there with lots of ideas, which is fantastic. And obviously we would like to encourage many more. But from the sort of actual what can we do as a council, other than just say warm words and say we'd all love you to come here, which we would all love you to come here. We have a business centre that can offer advice on setting up businesses. We have various workspaces, so we're just about to open a K&C Co-works, which will be for very sort of beginning entrepreneurial startups at affordable rates to have some workspace in the borough. We've got a next level space called Baseline, which is also more affordable for companies starting in this borough. And there are, in the north of the borough, a huge workspaces. I don't know if you've come across the Workspace Group, which has 4 huge studios there, of which a lot of tech companies have taken space in them. Unfortunately, we don't have a tech centre per se, which we would love to have, but I would like to say that we will be looking to the 2 big developments that are coming to this borough in the next 10 years, and very much encouraging them to look at giving incentives for tech companies to come and make this borough their home, because we welcome you.
Is it Councillor Mason? No? Okay.
Thank you. I think the council is in a good position to help the startups next year financially. And I think, as Councillor mentioned, yes, we are the council working, but I don't think we are doing enough. But for next year, we would urge the leadership to do more to help you and help your initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, and the next question is being asked by Fabian Frenzel, and he wants to talk about floods and what the council have done to prevent flooding.
Good evening, councillors. Thanks as well for the opportunity to speak here. Yeah, my question is about the floods in July 2021, of course, affected many residents and businesses in the north of the borough. It is timely insofar as I think the IPCC just early this week published this new report about the need to adapt to climate change, and I think we will face those events more frequently in the future. But when the floods happened in July 2021, I think unfortunately for many residents and businesses, it was already a déjà vu to 2007 when serious floods also happened. And my question today is around what the council has done in the time between 2007 and to July 2021 in terms of adapting to and working towards adapting to better flood prevention. I know a lot was talked about and a lot was attempted. There was, for example, the Countess Creeks project, which tried to address the issues in the area. I know since July 2021, there's also been a lot of talk and a lot of criticism of Thames Water, and Thames Water as a company has been taking a lot of the blame, I think. I just wonder, while I acknowledge and I see that it's probably very difficult to work with a monopoly company that is not, it's at the same time, it's a monopoly company, but it's not facing any market competition, but at the same time, is sort of responsible for all this. It's really hard, obviously, to work with that. I just wonder what the council has done and not done in those years since that happened. And particularly, I'm worried about certain measures that could have been taken and have been taken by a neighbouring borough, Hammersmith and Fulham, for example. They've installed what's called sustainable urban drainage systems on a large scale, 16 of them, across Hammersmith and Fulham to address the issue of flooding, to adapt. There's other measures. You can integrate flood defences in the local plan. There was talks about more sewers and sewer support. I wonder how many of these measures the council, RBKC, has actually taken. And I think specifically, for example, sustainable urban drainage systems, and whether you think it's fair to say in the end that RBKC has probably not done enough to prevent floods like this or to mitigate against floods like this happening in the borough. Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for coming, Mr. Frenzel. We've corresponded on several issues before, and I wanted to also congratulate you on, I understand you're standing at the upcoming local elections, and wish you the best of luck, as you said, about meeting lots of our residents and neighbours. Turning to what we've been doing, particularly in the months since July, I know that in the week after the flood, in Norland Ward itself, I went out with Councillor David Lindsay, an energetic champion for that community, and met residents who have been affected by flooding to understand their concerns and how we could help. I know personally, as a councillor for Holland Ward, just how badly affected many of my residents have been. I've spoken to people that have only recently and still are out of their residential properties, who've had their commercial premises made extremely badly affected by the floods last year. And so one of our big priorities has been holding Thames Water to account, as you alluded to. The council has met with Thames Water repeatedly on this subject and sought to hold them to account. I know that the leader and I met with senior representatives at Thames Water shortly after the flood, and we have expressed our disappointment that the Countess Creek project, which you also mentioned, was not taken forward, because we very much would have liked to have seen it implemented, and would like to see it implemented in the future now as soon as is practical. However, I'm afraid I disagree with the assertion that we haven't gone far enough in what we've done to advance flood protection. We're currently consulting on a new local plan which enshrines even stronger flooding policies, or rather flood mitigation policies, but they're already a big part of our planning policy framework. It's something we take very seriously. I know that local sewer improvements have been implemented at over 200 properties across the borough, and that we have fitted them with devices to reduce the risk of basement flooding as well. It is difficult to deliver retrofit SUDs within existing developed areas. However, we are implementing further sustainable drainage at places like Portobello Court, Holland Park Playground, Arundel Gardens, Dalgarno Gardens, and we will also continue to do that as far as possible, trying to access more funding to deliver things. And I'm also meeting the chairman of the independent review next week in Holland Ward at Addisland Court on Holland Villas Road, which I know has been seriously affected by the flooding, so that we can continue to be champions on this side of the chamber for people who have been affected by flooding, because we know that it's one of the top issues across Kensington and Chelsea.
Well, it's been obvious over the last 50 years in London, that, and not just in London, that climate change is increasingly affecting the way that we live and work. And we know that water levels are rising around the southeast, which is why back in the 80s the Thames Barrier had to be built. And now that is also going to be have to be replaced at some time. And of course, flooding in the last 15, 20 years that I remember here, we've got more and more incidents of flooding, not just in this borough, across London. And if you travel up and down the country, it's horrendously worse than it ever has been here, with whole towns and cities sometimes flooded out for weeks at a time. And so we can keep building flood barriers, which we'll have to, and we can keep mitigation measures on flooding. But of course, governments, and especially the governments of the last 10 years, have failed to put proper funding into flooding. You only have to listen to what the councils up and down the country say. And my guess is that it'll be difficult for councils, and even this council, to keep up with that. And it's quite possible that they haven't done as much as other councils, and there may be financial variations for that. But we are all going to have to, as a nation and as a government, change the way that we live. I meet people in meetings who are telling me desperately that they need to that we need to take measures to reduce climate change, but they themselves drive cars, or they do all sorts of different things that they fly all over the world. We're going to have to change the way that we live. Governments are going to have to take this seriously. They're dumping it on the individual at the moment and saying they need to fix it. Councils need to fix flooding, more barriers, and so on. But the water and the climate change problem is and has been increasing over the next century, and we've seen the predictions for the century after. Most of us will not be on this planet when our grandchildren and their children are going to be underwater or really suffering horrendous effects of climate change. So this is the end of the chain in a sense. The government must give councils proper funding for flood barriers and for flood mitigation, and councils have been cut and cut and cut over the last 20 years, and certainly the last 10 years. And so this is the end of the line, and this council should and probably should do more if you can get the funding for it. But this is a much, much bigger problem. We are all going to have to change the way that we live, otherwise in the next century this planet will become increasingly unlivable. And certainly London and the southeast is slowly sliding underwater. We know this. You can see this from what the scientists and meteorological people tell you. Yes, don't worry. Don't worry, you won't have to listen to me for much longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just wait a moment, please. Wait a minute.
Hi, you hear me now, yeah? Hi, everyone. I'm born in Ukraine, so my first very quick comment. I'm in a lot of pain, of course. Bringing to a topic, I registered for it before war, but I'm addressing it during war. So for me, my world changed completely, but I have to obviously focus on racism in rental area. The thing is, I've been here 18 years, right? I come from a very well-educated family. I've been investing in UK. I think in my startup, I invested £500,000 UK pounds. You know, I wanted to be part of this society, yeah? And when I talk about racism, you know, obviously today we talk about in the rental sector, but it's a much bigger issue than the rental sector. We're simply short of time. So in my particular current place where I'm living, I've signed a contract for 3 years, right? I said to agency, it is exceptionally important for me that it's a long term, because for a year I was recovering from back pain, not even back pain, I had a bulging disc. I had very, very bad condition physically. And I can't move homes. I was given all sorts of reassurances, you know, that absolutely you can live as long as you want. 4 months is on the line, I am getting this, forgive me saying that, nasty letter saying you have an opportunity to vacate. It was like a bad joke. I didn't breach for a moment any single term. They start saying that owner decided to sell a flat. I said, I'm sorry, you have a contract. You know, why you signed a contract? So agency blocked me access to owner, so I can't speak to owner directly. They keep pressurizing me every like 2 weeks, let's meet. I said, you know, to person home, look, I don't want these meetings. I have my business, I have my life, I have my commitments, I want peace, I'm paying you. So at first they were trying to pressurize. I was paying rent all time, in time. They reported to agency who usually screen us before we take accommodation that there is arrears. I start getting funny emails, you know, and they say, and then start being conversation between agency from whom I rent and agency who screen me. One blame another. One say it's you who made mistake, another one say no, but you reported, you know there were arrears. So they made fanciful breach of contract that I actually breached in contract and I can't even figure out by now where is the breach. They wanted me to leave on 23rd December, and because I paid rent, to leave beyond, it's my breach. So maybe someone can, again, figure out. I can't figure out, you know, logic of that argument. Before this particular place, when I was trying to, you know, find accommodation, I was told by letting agent, what's your ethnicity? I said, I'm very sorry, how does it relate to my flat search? They said, it's important for our landlord. You know, all the things taken together made me conclude, have I picked wrong country to live? Because, you know, I don't live 1,000 years, none of us does. But if a person gives so much as I gave to this country, and I have to be treated in this way, then clearly something is not working. And clearly it has to do with racism. Unfortunately, very sensitive topic. I address lots of English people. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but try to understand. When we are treated with racism, we are hurt. And I want to tell who they are, two agencies. Foxtons, #1, #2, TLC Real Estates. I now have TLC Real Estate, saga of 9 months. I apologize, I crossed my timeline.
Well, first of all, can I thank you for coming, and particularly given everything that's happening in the world, say my support to you and also to all of your compatriots as this horrendous invasion gets underway. I want to start by saying that we take racism incredibly seriously at this council, and I want to be absolutely clear that racism is unacceptable in all of its forms. I'm also very sorry to hear about your experience, because we don't want to hear about any such experience in this borough. Although councils are not directly responsible for privately tenanted accommodation, we can take action against rogue landlords, and our trading standards team oversees this. In terms of rogue landlords, a number of options are open to us, from penalty fines right up to banning orders in the very worst cases. And where there are allegations directly against letting agents, our trading standards team can investigate this and take action in conjunction with other teams where necessary. I know there are officers at the back of the chamber who would be very happy to pick this up if you feel that would be helpful, and we are also very, very happy to help as far as possible.
Thanks for coming, Natalia, and we are really sorry for what's happening to your nation and for your country. Our hearts and prayers goes to your people. I add my voice to Council Thala-Cities that racism is rejected altogether. It's not allowed. We have to fight it. We have 19,300 privately rented accommodation in the borough. We don't have control over them. That's why this is a budget meeting this evening. We, the Labour Group, proposed to appoint 2 new officers to advise because this is not one case. We have tens and hundreds of cases, our tenants needing advice and legal support. And I think it is our responsibility, council responsibility, to give them at least basic advice and target those who are behaving in this way. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the three speakers this evening for those questions, very interesting questions. Thank you very much. Item 5, petitions. Do any councillors have any petitions to submit?
Before we move on from the question hour, I would like to make a point. I am extremely distressed that we haven't had an hour's set aside tonight for questions from residents. I had a resident approach me yesterday wanting to speak about the situation in the Ukraine and about its relevance to housing in the Royal Borough. I advised him immediately to contact the Town Hall. He was told that, the 3 spaces reserved had already been occupied, so please come back in July. Mr. Mayor, I think that one of the few changes that we have made in the light of the Grenfell fire was the 1 hour that was set aside for residents to come and speak to us. And gradually this has been taken away and has been hemmed in, taken over, if you like, by the Town Hall establishment. I think it's particularly bad tonight that we've had half an hour already talking about what, I mean, I don't want to be unpleasant, but municipal flim-flam, for if you want, and we could have done that outside of the council meeting, and I think it would have been more appropriate and more honest.
Thank you very much,
if it wasn't. No, Mr. Mayor, please. I was the leader of the Labour group when we introduced this 1 hour, and I was very proud of it. Now, to begin with, it was quite difficult because we were dealing with very angry people. It then started to function very well. But as I say, it's been taken over and it's been downgraded. I mean, I can understand why it's probably more efficient to ask people to book in advance, but they're now asked to actually give a synopsis of what they're going to say. And it seems to me that it would be very straightforward to say that the 1 hour is the time when our residents are free to come and speak to us. And if they book their appointments in advance,
Thank you very much, Councillor
well and
Atkinson.
good.
Councillor Atkinson, your point has been made.
I'm sorry, I'm drawing my...
Your point has been made.
I'm coming to the end of my point. Yes, it is advisable that people book their slots in advance. But as has happened tonight and has happened on a number of other occasions, we end up early. So what I used to advise people to do was, even if they hadn't...
Councillor Atkinson, thank you very much. I am going to turn your microphone off in a minute. Thank you very much indeed. You've made your point. Thank you. Thank you very much. So,
could I just
I will just say that
respond?
we will obviously be returning to the hour at the next meeting, and I suspect to those residents who are here this evening, what they were discussing was hardly flim-flam to them. Thank you for your comments, and they're noted. Councillor Campbell.
Could I just respond? Could I just respond just very briefly? Just like to say, Robert, obviously we have to ask people to book in advance, because if you remember in the past, there were people who were coming who weren't residents, and I remember you taking umbrage at that, fair enough, as we all did. I think the other thing...
Councillor Atkinson, can you please allow people to answer the question?
The other thing I'd just like to say is we haven't reduced the slot speakers. It's just tonight, because it's a budget meeting. But it's always 1 hour, and tonight is the exception. And finally, I'd just like to say, your half an hour of flim-flam that you alluded to wasn't part of the council meeting. The council meeting started at 6:30. We had half an hour because people wanted to thank people who have had long periods of service like you. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson. Councillor Atkinson, I'm now going to move on to item number 6. Statement by the leader. Councillor Atkinson, I'm going to have to ask, it'd be a shame after your career to have you to leave the chamber. You know how to behave. Please respect the chair, if nothing else. Thank you very much. We now move on to item number 6, statement by the Leader in response by the Leader of the Minority Party. In accordance with Standing Order 42, I wish to move. Councillor Thalcitis, do you wish to move?
Oh, sorry.
I beg to move indeed, Mr Mayor.
Right.
What do you wish to move, Councillor Thalcitis?
Standing
Councillor
order.
Thalcitis,
What's that? Which stand?
what do you wish to move?
Is it 42?
Got ruffled. Ruffled
Yes,
by
it
this.
is. Mr Mayor. Where are we? Mr Mayor, in accordance with Standing Order 42, I wish to move that Standing Order 30 be suspended this evening to allow the Leader and Councillor Baxia up to 7 minutes each for their speeches.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Thank you very much. I now ask the Leader to speak to up to 7 minutes. Go.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I confess, I did have a speech ready, which was all about setting the context for our budget. Low council tax, value for money, excellent services, tackling climate change, improving our housing, building new homes. And I was going to talk about the pride that I have in the current leadership team and this organisation and all we've achieved with our communities and businesses over the last 4 years, 2 of which have been spent dealing with the challenges of an unprecedented global pandemic. But another unprecedented global challenge has now entered the fray. Tonight, I think it's important that we reflect on the fast-moving events in Ukraine after Putin started his needless and illegal invasion just a week ago. Mr. Baer, by the end of this week, we can expect to see the number of refugees leaving Ukraine up at the 1 million mark. 1 million people displaced from a European country, European cities, and European towns. It is almost incomprehensible, but it's true. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm very pleased you've raised the Ukrainian flag outside the town hall this evening. And I agree, it is incredibly important that we show solidarity with our friends and allies. In a similar vein, last week, I announced some of the very early measures that we were taking to do our bit. We've written to the embassy, based right here in our borough, to offer any possible support we can. Instead of spending money on lighting up buildings, as many others have, we decided to make a donation to charities already involved in the difficult and dangerous humanitarian response. As you've mentioned, we provided space at the town hall for people of all faiths to gather, pray and talk about the issues we now all face. And today I can also announce we will be checking our providers, our supply chains and service areas to ensure that we're not indirectly funding those associated with this invasion. The world is looking to the UK and its allies to show leadership, and that is something that we have to do nationally and locally, something that councillors, officers and communities right across this borough have demonstrated time and time again in response to the Grenfell tragedy, through COVID-19, through the Afghanistan evacuation, and we must do so again. But, Mr. Mayor, I also ask for unity. Protests outside the Russian embassy on the edge of our borough have been peaceful and patient so far, and that is a credit to the people involved. We also have to understand that it would also be wrong of us to assume that every single Russian who lives here in KNC supports the actions of one man and his army. And I think the government is rightly targeting those who fund Putin and targeting the areas that bring the most pain to his leadership and an end to this attack. Mr. Mayor, a huge number of organisations in the UK are already providing support and help, and the Council will aim to do the same, from aid and supplies to rehousing and accommodation, just like we did when thousands were forced to flee Afghanistan last year. And I'd urge residents across the borough to do the same. Do what we can to actively support the humanitarian effort. The people of Ukraine will need every one of us in the coming days, months, and perhaps, sadly, even years. Mr. Mayor, as we turn to matters to be addressed this evening, it's important that we also recognise the challenges we face and the local elections coming our way this May. My leadership team and the whole Conservative group are already on doorsteps, listening to our communities, discussing what's been achieved in the last 4 years and what's most important in the coming 4. People are positive about our response to COVID and the renewed sense of community spirit. our communication and the way that we work with communities. We hear time and time again that affordability in housing is a #1 priority, and more people are focused on climate change and tackling the environmental challenges. And we also hear of other challenges: the cost of living, work and employment, health and well-being. So, Mr. Mayor, our budget aims to tackle these challenges, especially by keeping our council tax low. We have some of the lowest council tax rates in the country, and that's important for a borough that has economic and social gaps for us to bridge. We also present a balanced budget, a conservative budget, a budget that is costed and clear, that delivers what people need the most. We will build on the changes we've made, be relentlessly competent with your money and with your services. We will continue to tackle the two most acute issues in the borough, housing and climate change, by putting our funding where it really matters. A total over 600 million earmarked for homes, highways, streets, education and infrastructure. We're accelerating our £144 million Green Plan, with 100 million across our estates, 8 million on greening schools and 4 million on council buildings. And all of this is just a first step. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I hope thank you actually for giving me a little more time to say a few thank yous, and it will include you, I promise. I want to thank all councillors for their efforts over the last 4 years, and especially those who are leaving. To name a few: Judith, after 40 years a councillor; Pat Mason, 30 years; Pat Healy, 24 years; and Robert Atkinson. Robert, who stood up as the most dignified leader of the opposition in the wake of the Grenfell Tower tragedy in 2017. He represented his community, he held us to account, still does, and did so fairly and with decency. And behind me, Robert Freeman leaves us after 24 years, as well as Julie and Charles, each having served 16. I don't have time tonight to mention everybody by name, but all of you should feel proud to have represented your neighbourhoods and wards, whether you've done so for 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, or 40 years. And finally, thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of my ambitions when I became leader was to help reshape and modernise the council, and the Mayor's office is the epitome of that aim. Not abandoning the traditions we have, but bringing them into the modern day. This organisation, under a new chief executive later this year, will continue to modernise and build on the changes we've made. And we will stay being a council led by our communities. Thank you.
Very much. Councillor Bactell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, there is one important subject which is affecting everyone that I would like to talk about this evening. As a former refugee, I am very much involved in helping refugees around the world, and I have been involved in collecting medicine and medical supplies and sending them back to Syrian refugee camps in Iraq and Syria. And I was involved in welcoming the Afghan refugees and introducing them to Al-Mana Mosque last summer. Like most of you, I thought that after World War II, due to devastation, we had learned to live in peace and never think of war as a solution. But I was wrong. War could start anywhere in the world, and the victims are as always civilians. We have all been shocked by seeing the Russian forces invading Ukraine a week ago. And as a direct result, more than 1 million people have been displaced internally, and nearly another 1 million are displaced in the neighboring countries. I would like to urge the government to help and bring all of those who are willing to come and seek refuge in the UK. This war could become the beginning of the biggest event in the 21st century, if not the final one, and there will be no winners. Mr. Mayor, this is the only time that liberal democracy has come into danger since World War II. The UK government did the right thing by supporting the Ukrainian people by sending standing with them and encouraging other nations to follow the lead. It was the UK government who led the world in fighting and defeating Nazism and fascism during the Second World War, and saved and preserved the free nations along with their allies. This is not just an ordinary war between two countries disputing over territory, but a war that was started by a dictator who is hungry for more power, a dictator who is no different from Hitler, Saddam Hussein, and Idi Amin. It was started by someone who has no regard for human life and is ready to kill millions for his dream of starting another empire. Mr. Mayor, war has never been an option and never will be. We see all free nations around the world standing together to defend liberal democracy, which was challenged by Mr. Putin's tyranny. This is a war between Ukraine and their friends and allies, and those who want to reinstate dictatorship around the world. This event will have a devastating effect on everything on this planet, and that's exactly why we should all be united in solidarity with Ukrainians and free nations to stop this unnecessary war. The oligarchs around Mr. Putin and other dictators around the world have been investing their money that they have stolen from the nations in London and in the borough by buying properties and leaving them empty, fueling the housing crisis in the borough and London. I am glad that the government is about to take steps to resolve this problem, which is being supported by the opposition. This process should be a major one, not just targeting the oligarchs with links to the Russian president, but to target dictators around the world because they think they can buy any politician or any decision maker in the UK and the West. We need to prove them wrong by introducing a radical reform in our democratic institutions, and we need to do it urgently. Mr. Mayor, I have started a campaign of collecting medicine and medical supplies to send to Ukraine. And I have many volunteers contacting me and came forward. I would like to ask everyone in this chamber, if you know someone who is willing to help by donating or willing to transport them back to Ukraine, please let me know to coordinate. Our prayers and thoughts to the victims and innocent people of Ukraine. We hope that this meaningless war ends as soon as possible, and we are sorry for the loss on both sides. And finally, Mr. Mayor, coming back to the council business, I have received a letter from a resident in Kensington. I will read the letter. My husband has paid national insurance and taxes since 1960, and council tax from 1964, thinking that if the need arose, he would get financial assistance. My husband managed to avoid troubling the NHS in any way or personal social services until he reached the age of 84. Regrettably, since November 2021, my husband's health has dramatically deteriorated to the extent that I am now his primary carer. He is in bed, he's bedridden and immobile at home. He is dependent on 4 visits daily from a team of 2 carers. This course of action was recommended by the NHS as the optimal means of supporting care that he needs. I am shocked to find, having applied to financial assistance to the borough, that none is available and we are likely to have foot the bill ourselves. I am sure that you appreciate that the difficulty of doing this from the standard NHS and statutory state pensions. I enclose a copy of the latest care bill, which would be deemed higher than by a month because he was in hospital. I wish to register my absolute dismay that if we lived in the borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, this crisis would have been free. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We now move to item number 7, the order of business. In accordance with standing orders, I rule that the order of business shall be circulated around the chamber. Councillor Tharsidis.
Oh, I won't get it wrong twice. Mr Mayor, in accordance with Standing Order 42, I wish to move that Standing Order 30 be suspended this evening to allow Councillor Wheel and Councillor Bakhtiar up to 10 minutes each for their budget speeches.
Seconded. Thank you. So, item number 8.1, Revenue Budget, Capital Programme and Council Tax, 2022-23. We now turn to item number 1, Revenue Budget, Capital Programme and Council Tax for 2022-23. Councillor Wheel and Councillor Bakhtiar will make their budget speeches. The Labour amendments to the Revenue Budget and Capital Programme will then be moved and seconded. There will then be a general debate on the Revenue Budget and Council Tax and Capital Programme. Councillor Bakhtiar will then sum up on the Labour amendments. Councillor Wheel will make the closing remarks before the final recorded votes on the amendment and the recommendation. As members will have detected, we are having technical problems this evening. The normal camera systems are not working, so we are using standing cameras at the back, hence no picture there. Also, the timers are not working, so you won't see the lights going on, but I will indicate when you have 1 minute to go within the time allocated for your speeches. So, I therefore call upon the leader to move the reception of the reports and Councillor Wheel to second.
I move the report.
Councillor Wheel to make her budget speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I always feel that budget night is one of the most important meetings we have in this chamber every year. It sets the tone for the coming year and encapsulates our aspirations. Tonight, for once, it feels very unimportant. Against the backdrop of the invasion of the Ukraine by the brute force of a frightened and corrupt regime, which imprisons and humiliates its bravest citizens and seeks to dominate and destroy an independent nation state. And I was really troubled by this irrelevance when I was feeling of irrelevance when I was thinking about what to say tonight. But then I reflected that what we do here in our own sort of humble way is at the very heart of the opposition to those forces. We're not on the front line in Kiev or Kharkiv, but we can be here, between us all, making democracy work, however imperfectly. So whatever else we do tonight, let us remember that, as well as the brave citizens of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So tonight, I'm proud to present a budget which addresses the challenges of our recent past, meets the needs of the present, and offers a strategy for the future. A budget that allows the Council to face imminent challenges with confidence. In other words, this is not just a budget, it's a Kensington and Chelsea budget. I want to start by looking back to a year where this Council has adapted quickly to changing circumstances whilst maintaining quality of provision. Our Council Tax and Finance teams adapted to support businesses affected by the pandemic by administering over £115 million in grants quickly and efficiently, but also rigorously. Each wave of them bringing new rules to be investigated and worked with. At the end of COVID, we emerged with 3 nascent business improvement districts, a force for growth and recovery in our much-loved high streets. Also this last year, we continued to provide groundbreaking services to the bereaved and survivors of Grenfell. We've been particularly aware that these residents have lived through 2 crises in short succession, and for many, COVID risks amplifying existing challenges. During this period, our outstanding officers have maintained the highest performance and values, and I'd like to take this opportunity to express my appreciation. And perhaps particularly to acknowledge the work of officers in my own portfolio. The Customer Access Department dealt with over 109,000 face-to-face visits and 500,000 telephone calls each year. Throughout the pandemic, they've coped admirably with working in different ways. The HR department have supported our workforce with their well-being and redeployment, whilst also coordinating testing and vaccination centres. A council marches not on its stomach, which is probably just as well given my cooking abilities, but by dint of its staff and their commitment to our residents, which I think has been so triumphantly proved this last year. Our legal team continues to support the Grenfell Public Inquiry. Our colleagues in procurement are improving contract management, and our finance team keep us on the straight and narrow. But also, they really do see themselves as facilitators for all our council's ambitions. I'd like particularly to thank colleagues in IT for their dedication and focus during the incredibly intensive period of disaggregation of our services from Westminster. I'm so impressed by their efforts, and I know that they will create a really innovative sovereign service. All lead members are proud of their officers, and I think this is an opportunity to remind my colleagues that their successes are achieved by staff recruited by HR, enabled by legal, finance, IT and procurement professionals, and when there's any confusion, it's the customer access department that sorts it out. I would also like to acknowledge the contribution of councillors on both sides of this chamber, for many of whom this will be their last budget. And whilst they may view that with lamentable relief, after all, really what could be more interesting than listening to me for 10 minutes, I'm sad that so many estimable colleagues on both sides of the chamber, all of whom have contributed so much, will be leaving us. Despite any political differences, all our retiring councillors have contributed enormously to the borough. The difficulties of COVID have left their mark on our hearts as well as our balance sheets. A budget is about more than just money. It reflects the choices we make as a community. So turning to the present, first some headline figures. After all, a budget without numbers would be a bit like a Labour Party without infighting. Restful, but not really very realistic. This year, we will spend £631 million on services for our 156,000 residents, 15,000 businesses, and the 56,000 visitors that we hope to welcome back to the borough each day. Over the next 3 years, £297 million will be invested in schools, early years, transport, environment, open spaces, public buildings and digital infrastructure. In addition, £315 million will be invested in our housing stock. Our spending is focused on delivering our residents' priorities, from twice-weekly bin collection and maintaining outstanding schools through to clean, vibrant, safe streets, as well as a continuing commitment to the victims of Grenfell. This council has an underpinning aim to help our residents to live their best lives, no matter what their circumstances. We are a council which treats our residents as individuals, not a Procrustean socialist organisation that pigeonholes its citizens for its own agenda. Neither is this council afraid to engage with the biggest problems facing this city. Addressing the climate emergency and improving air quality for our residents remains a top priority. And this is not just hot air. Our green budget invests what's required to make a real difference. And now let's talk about tax. As a Conservative council, we feel a duty to our residents to maintain our low rate of tax without risking our prudent financial stewardship. This is a fine balancing act. We must keep one eye on the here and now and the other on the future. I'm mindful also that our residents are facing an outrageously steep rise in the Greater London Authority precept, a stunning 8.8% to pay for the Mayor's preposterous mismanagement. Unlike the Mayor, we care about the fact that our residents are facing a cost of living pressures, but the Council is also faced with the same inflationary pressures in addition to other exogenous factors. For example, and I think this is really important to draw to the Chamber's attention, over £12 million of our income this year is in ostensibly one-off grants. Now, I don't want to scaremonger, and I don't imagine for a moment that those will all fall away instantly next year. But a severe diminution has to be a strong possibility, and we need to plan for that. There is a continuing tension between keeping our taxes low for residents and not eroding our tax base. Last year, I was constrained in view of COVID to suggest a larger than usual council tax rise. That is why, even in the current inflationary environment, I am proposing a modest increase this year, a council tax increase of 0.99% with a 1% adult social care precept. This will keep council tax in London's lowest quartile, while we continue to fully fund the local council tax reduction scheme to protect residents on low incomes. Currently, there are over 13,000 households receiving a reduction of up to 100%, costing the council a net cost of 14 million. Whilst this is an increase that I've suggested, it's a modest one because we've taken measures to ensure that the entire burden of budgetary pressures is not passed on to our residents. We are implementing budget savings of nearly 5 million within core services and significant savings in borrowing costs from a realistic adjustment of our capital programme, not ripping out really important projects such as housing for unaccompanied asylum children, as the Labour Party seem to be doing. Looking to the future, we're committed to ensuring that our services offer value for money. We have a duty to taxpayers not to waste their money, and discharging that duty is not a one-off exercise, but demands continuing vigilance. It's my mission to continue to improve our organisational efficiency. Our cross-cutting transitions programme will bear down on costs,
1 minute.
increase income levels and contribute towards closing the budget gap. Already nearly £5 million of recurring costs have been saved following a review of council staffing. These thorough preparations are designed to deal with the future risks we know about, but we must also be prudent with our contingency. We have a central contingency budget of 5.2 million, a social care pressure budget of 5 million, and a contingency of 4.5 million to deal with inflation. And I'm putting these into central contingencies rather than service budgets to encourage better financial discipline. In conclusion, Mr. Mayor, I hope everyone from around the chamber will welcome this budget. It addresses the challenges of our recent past, meets the needs of the present, and prepares us to face the future with confidence. I hope that we can all agree that, whatever your political colours, whether they're red, blue, green, or that peculiar shade of orange, this is a budget that keeps Kensington and Chelsea firmly out of the red. Desirable, I think you'll all agree, or maybe two-thirds of you will agree, in so many ways. And I think that's something we should celebrate. I commend this budget to the Council, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I now call on Councillor Bakhtiar to make his speech, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This year, we are enjoying some extra government grants that we should be using to help our residents in these difficult times. We have 2.3 million grant from the government for social care and 3.6 million government grant for new services, 1.4 million underspent from last year, and 6.6 million left from COVID recovery last year. We believe that we should spend it on our residents. If we add them up, that's 13.9 million. The Council is in a comfortable position this year to freeze the Council tax rise by 0.99% and to spend it on adult social care, family and children, and education. The effect of 12 years government austerity policies and had already reduced the income for in-work households in the borough and created serious financial problems that often resulted in mounting debt for less affluent, low-paid households. And 1 in 4 borough children are living in poverty as a result, and most of them are from North Kensington. Mr. Mayor, this Council isn't doing enough about the problems our residents are faced with in the north of the borough, and especially those who have suffered a big loss of household income through becoming unemployed or because of their businesses is closed due to COVID-19 pandemic, and specifically now with the energy bill rising in a way that never seen before. We need to support the families who their children had been identified to be living in poverty so that they can survive and continue their education. The Council has published its plan for 2019-2023 in a document. It's full of positive indicators of successes and things that still need to be doing. It seems that the Council has plans on how to tick the right boxes to look good. There are some interesting information and statistics in the document. For instance, 1 in 4 of children in the borough are living in poverty, which is really worrying. 23% of the Borough students do not continue their education after completing their A-levels. Mr. Mayor, 20% of our students cannot secure places at higher education or further education or an apprenticeship. The council claims in its plan that in the borough that it has the highest life expectancy in the country for men and second highest for women. This could be true in some areas, but not in the northern wards that we represent. 5.7% in unemployment in the borough and much more in the northern wards and some other parts in the borough. We have 25,700 households living in social housing, 19,300 households rent privately, and 27,500 households own their homes, meaning more than 60% of our residents live in social housing or privately rented accommodations. We believe that private housing stock in the borough needs to be maintained to an adequate environmental health and fire safety standards, with fair rents, and that private rented sector tenants facing unfair rent increases, harassment, and eviction, and therefore they need more free legal advice and support. Mr. Mayor, we should use the planning route section 106 by insisting on having required amount of social and affordable housing units in the future developments on site as an alternative of having money in lieu of the developer's contribution towards social and affordable housing, or to buy them outside the borough, as well as asking the developers to build a car electrical charging point for every housing unit they build in the borough. Mr. Mayor, almost 5 years on, and tens of millions had been spent on Greenfield recovery, and yet some of the survivors and bereaved are still unsatisfied. The council hasn't been transparent enough to restore trust with its residents. We need to review the council's actions. We still think that we need to have all Greenfield-related issues in one scrutiny committee. And it's time for the leadership to admit they have made a mistake by abolishing the Greenfield Scrutiny Committee. We don't need to analyze why this decision was taken. Instead, we need to recognize that the new system isn't functioning as it was anticipated, and there are no clear accountability under the new system. Mr. Mayor, back in July 2018, this council passed a motion to encourage residents to work in their council. Since then, we have had more local people working in the council, though this progress is noted, but only a small number of our residents had been recruited, and the newcomers are taking minor positions. Mr. Mayor, we have noticed that the consultations that we run are not good enough, and this is a national problem. To resolve this, the council leadership needs to be brave and dare to step outside the box and try new ideas. I call the existing process by which we manage our consultations the negative engagement, meaning the council advertises a new consultation on a specific matter and waits for members for public to respond by post, email, online, or attend to advertised location. Despite the technology advances and online facilities, human interaction is still the best way to engage with people. Mr. Mayor, unemployment is linked to some crimes, and most crimes are in the borough and in London are linked to drug dealing and its use, antisocial behavior, burglary, and shoplifting. Crime leads to destabilizing families and breaking our communities. The council needs to be positive. The council needs to have provisions for large scale of CCTVs and in crime hotspots, and make the safety and security of its residents a priority. If the Council is looking to find solution, they need to act swiftly. The leadership claims that the Grenfell Tower fire shaped them, but that is not reflected in their actions, and our residents can't see any major change either. The COVID-19 pandemic and the associated restrictions have made the large number of our students fall behind academically. Most students could benefit from group learning. However, there are others who cannot. The Council owes a duty of care to our residents, children, and students. Therefore, we need to focus our attention on the 25% of children who live in poverty and 23% of whom not getting good marks in specific subjects. To overcome this problem, this Council needs to try and provide a free one-to-one tuition for those children who live in poverty. Mr. Mayor, the drug dealing, crime, and antisocial behavior triangle is affecting our communities in North Kensington. While young teenage children and school leavers who are dragged into crime and drug distribution kill and stab each other over territory, the well-off drug users who fuel this problem by buying the drugs are having it delivered to them on a takeaway order basis without having to go into much trouble. We recognize that this is indeed a national problem needing to be addressed by the Parliament and the government through toughening the existing rules and legislations and introducing new ones. But the local government could use some of their authority and at least be as creative as the criminals to challenge them in operating freely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. We now move to the Labour amendments. Will Councillor Bakhtiar please formally move and Councillor Ali please formally second the revenue budget amendments?
I beg to move, Mr. Mayor.
I beg to second, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you very much. Will Councillor Dent-Code please formally move and Councillor Lowry formally second the amendments to the capital programme? Thank you.
I beg to second, Mr.
Thank you very much. We now move to a general debate about the budget. Members are advised that they should not restrict their comments to revenue budget items as we are taking revenue and capital together. I do have a long list of councillors who have indicated they wish to speak. I will try and get through as many as I can, but I would ask councillors to be brief with their comments and stick to the timings, please. Any member wishing to speak? Councillor Lindsay.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Those of us of a certain...
Sorry to interrupt you. If we're back to a stage of councillors wish to stand up, they can stand up to speak. You may not wish to, I appreciate it.
Are you going to stand up?
Mr. Mayor, those of us of a certain age can probably remember when inflation was high. It is now 5.4% and it is likely to get higher, particularly because of shortages of fuel and food, disproportionately much of which comes from the Ukraine and Russia. My concern is that inflation is difficult to get under control. Those of us who may have studied economics at university might remember that an analogy for bringing it under control is akin to getting toothpaste that has come out of the tube back into the tube. It is possible. It takes a long time, but it's messy. And getting inflation under proper control will be very costly for everyone. Because my concern is that the likelihood is that inflation, on page 41, it says it is anticipated that these high rates of inflation are short-term and longer-term rates will move back down to the target rate of 2%. I think that is wishful thinking. I think it's much more likely, Mr. Mayor, that inflation will be between 5 and 10% for most of the next 10 years to cut the cost of debt because of COVID. And that has huge implications for the council, in terms of council tax. But I move on, Mr. Mayor. The contingency of some 5.25 million, I commend the lead member for having a respectable contingency. But I remind her of what Harold Macmillan once said about governing when asked what makes governing so difficult. And he said, events, dear chap, events. What is going to be the effect of the Ukrainian crisis? We don't know, and of other unforeseen events, including further activity by Tsar Vladimir the Expanding. We simply don't know, but don't say that central government is going to give us yet more grants indefinitely. It won't. Briefly to turn to a couple of other topics. On page 14, the Grenfell Education Fund has been kept at £500,000, and I commend the lead member for that, to help pupils, to help pupils, not head teachers, avoid difficult decisions regarding falling roles. I wonder if the lead member can give reassurance that that is what is happening. And my second, more general question is, Families and Children's Services is a very highly performing department in this authority, but are we getting the best value possible for the high spend we've got? And last, a plea. Trees. There are 6 references in this document, having done a word search, to trees, 4 of which relate to the January meeting. And there are 2 very minor ones in this current budget paper. But I wonder, reflecting the motion at last January's meeting, a motion that was agreed by the majority party, but on which the Labour Party abstained, whether we might have as a goal for the next year, and indeed the next 4 years, of 100 trees per ward for the coming year, and 250 trees per ward over the forthcoming 4 years. Ambitious, yes, but a very attractive way of helping us to achieve carbon net zero. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dent Code.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I give no apologies at all for focusing on a single issue in the capital budget, though of course I have the usual concerns about rampant spending on Holland Park, Leighton House, flower stalls and other fripperies while our food banks run out of supplies, which happened this week. Mr. Mayor, in early 2013, with a council waiting list of over 8,500 households, not people, plans to spend £50 million buying a plot of land in Peterborough to build homes for aspiring young people from the waiting list were revealed. The Labour group had no knowledge of this plan. It was being discussed behind closed doors. In February 2013, it hit the press. Here's my favourite report, I keep these things, from the Peterborough Evening Standard. A posh London borough is planning to home scores of people from its waiting list in Peterborough. And the Evening Standard said, families face being sent to Peterborough. This was all pretty shocking, especially as Labour group had no knowledge of this proposal whatever to spend £50 million moving residents out of the borough. Eventually, a Freedom of Information request informed us that the talks had begun nearly a year previously. Fortunately, this proposal failed. Instead of finding another way to house our homeless, the council had a better idea. They decided to convert the waiting list into a housing register that would only include those with priority need, cunningly slicing the 8,500 household list to a much smaller but more needy 2,200. That's 3,300 fewer desperate households. Job done. The current proposal to purchase properties for temporary accommodation is equally alarming. Between 2016 and 2019, £10.5 million was spent buying properties outside the borough for temporary accommodation. Part of the plan was to make a modest profit of 500,000 at the end of this acquisition period. The current plan to spend 40 million on buying homes for temporary accommodation, a mix of former right to buy within the borough, focusing on families with specific needs, plus some outside the borough. It lacks detail. There are no financial viability assessments to evidence the claim that this could save money, nothing. No detail of what modest profit could be achieved, and no detail on how many specialist needs homes right to buy and how many outside the borough are planned. In summary, including the earlier properties bought from 2016-17, the Council would have spent £53 million, including borrowing costs, with no assurances as to where they may be bought. We are asked to approve this on trust. We won't. Meanwhile, we have homeless families placed in former housing association homes, bought from right-to-buy tenants who bought from the Council. These were all bought with high levels of subsidy along the way, including more recently a further £100,000 from the GLA for councils buying back right to buy. Some of these tenants might like to stay in the home they're living in. So I asked the Council why their temporary accommodation homes, side by side with secure tenants, can't be allocated as permanent secure tenancies. This was my response from the Council. The buying back of these homes is only viable if we let them as temporary accommodation, for which the rent is higher than the social rent level, allowing us to cover the cost of borrowing. In 2011, former Councillor Coleridge said that housing associations, which were ramping up rents drastically in the borough at the time, were using tenants as cash cows. Buying homes to let to homeless households, then doomed to pay a high rent, or indeed whose rent is covered to an extent by the government, so that the council can pay off their loan, could also be seen as using homeless families as cash cows. Keeping families in limbo in permanent temporary housing to build up the council's property asset base is unacceptable. The Labour Group cannot accept this proposal and rejects it in the strongest possible terms. This 40 million should be mobilised instead to bolster the new homes programme so we can build more homes for social rent within the borough and give our homeless families a secure home where they can give their children the best possible start. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hammond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and may I first of all commend the lead member and her officers for presentation of the budget. The remarks I want to start with a couple of observations from my position on the Housing and Community Select Committee, and particularly to welcome the capital programme on the housing side. We all know that the TMO was a failure, but I want to commend the work that's been done led by the Deputy Leader and his officers during this council term to bring the council estate back in-house and manage it properly. And the investment that's been put in here, there's an enormous amount of money in this budget being put into the upgrade of our council estate and to maintain those homes. And the more we put into upgrading them now, the less there should be of a repair bill in the future. So this is a really, really positive step that the council has taken over the last 4 years, and that programme is ongoing, and I warmly welcome it. I also warmly welcome the new homes programme, which Councillor Dent-Code has mentioned, and I'm glad she agrees with it. But 600 new homes, at least 300 to be social rent, that is a good programme. Those that have gone through, we've got the excellent Stage 1 programmes being built. 4 sites, I think, in that. The designs were amazing, really good. Bulb is very good as well, and I commend the Deputy Leader for his flexibility as we work through the more difficult sites later on, and I know we'll make some progress with that in the next term. So this is a really good programme. The lead member for the environment, my friend Councillor Thalasides, would be disappointed if I didn't mention the maintenance of historic built assets, which and I'm very, very pleased that the next chunk of funding for this has appeared in the Capital Pipeline 1 budget for the next period. Since the last time we had a budget, there's been a survey of the assets. A contractor has been put on, a contract has been let for the first work, and that should start in the summer. So there is some work going to happen, some tangible work this year. So that programme that was a result of a working group that I did with Councillor Bennis and Councillor Aretti in our first year, 4 years ago, is now bearing fruit. It does take a long time, but it's good to see some progress. Very good points in the budget, but we do have an amendment tonight, and there have been times in the last 4 years when I've looked through the Labour budget, and I have looked through the shadow budget very carefully, and there have been some good points in previous shadow budgets. Unfortunately, tonight, well, I was looking for some gold, but this is not a crock of gold here. I'm finding, let's pick up a few random points. Inflation. Well, Councillor Lindsay, who's left his seat, Councillor Lindsay made a very good point about inflation earlier on. But what does the shadow budget do? Well, it takes out £1.4 million out of the inflation contingency. Of all the years to do it, I mean, don't they read the news? Don't they understand economics? Inflation is one of the biggest problems that is approaching in this country at the moment. And to reduce the inflation contingency is pretty foolish, I would say. Let's have a look at another one. What have I opened up here? Oh, yes. It's opened up on cycle lanes. Well, it's good to know that they've nailed their colours to the mast and they support built cycle lanes. I hope the residents of Norland, Pembridge and Holland Moor have noted that because I think they're probably putting themselves on the wrong side of the residents there. What have we got here? We've got they're calling for a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. That's an interesting one. I don't know what that's got to do with the budget. But haven't we done that? Didn't we do that?
Yes, yes.
Councillor Denko told me the other day she's got a car. I'm assuming she has been obeying the speed limit for the last year because it has, we have had this 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in place for at least a year, if not two. She has been. Well, that's the police responsibility, and I'm sure that I'm sure she will obey the speed limit now she knows that the 20-mile-an-hour zone is in place. What else have we got? Oh, they mentioned rental properties. Now, we do have a problem with short-term holiday lets in the South Kensington area. We know about that. One of the that's coming back after the pandemic. One of the previous shadow budgets a couple of years ago, written by I think one of the members on the backbench who's not here today, but it was a very intelligent contribution. It worked on that problem. What we've got tonight is a sledgehammer that attacks the entire rental property market, and what that would do would reduce supply and actually exacerbate the entire problem that we've got. So that's not a good move either.
Time.
And therefore I do not support the amendment, and I commend the budget not amended to the Chamber.
Thank you. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Labour Group budget proposal and amendment is based on the reality in Kensington and Chelsea. This is a significant moment for our residents, and the decisions we make this evening will have an impact on the lives of many of our residents who have gone through the last 5 years of Grenfell disaster as well as living with COVID-19. One of our top priority for the budget proposal that we have this evening for the Labour Group is to support our residents with a high cost of living and supporting with the energy bills, Mr. Mayor, for the next year as they recover from the COVID-19. According to the Institute for Government, the cost of living on the cost of the crisis is due to the fall of real household income as well as the inflation. The cost is expected to worsen as the Conservative plan taxes will take in form next month, from the 1st of April 2022. Therefore, the Labour Group is recommending for its budget proposal for £2.5 million package to support residents with energy bills. The £2.5 million is funded from the special project reserves. Mr. Mayor, as you know, Kensington and Chelsea residents and the whole country have gone through tough times for the last 2 years. And if we could not use the budget project reserve for this occasion, I don't understand when we will be able to use. I wish to know if the Conservative leadership thinks that living with the COVID-19 for the last 2 years is not harsh enough for our residents, or not give us the opportunity to use the special budget reserves. What will be the occasion? Tax reduction, council tax reduction. Mr. Mayor, we're also proposing no council tax this year for 2021-2023 financial year. We're also proposing the Labour Group for this council leadership to lobby the Secretary of State to amend the outdated for the council tax banning that has not been altered since 1992, as it's set out on Section 5, the Local Government Finance Act 1992. One may ask, Mr. Mayor, why bother amending the €30 Act at this time? It's directly related to the housing crisis in Kensington and Chelsea. As you're well aware of, we have over 3,000 households waiting over 3,000 in the register of the housing, and more than 2,000 of them are in temporary accommodation, and some of them have been living more than 10 years. In contrast to that, Mr. Mayor, we have hundreds of empty properties in our borough. About 600 of them have been empty since 2019, according to data provided 2021, and 280 of them has been vacant since January 2016. More astonishingly, Mr. Mayor, 70 homes have been stood empty in the borough for the last 10 years, while we have temporary residents who have been living temporary accommodation and cannot plan for the future for more than 10 years. Mr. Mayor, this outdated and unfair council tax banding has to come to the end, and it's time for all of us to work to make sure that the Secretary of State deals with this issue once and for all. If the Tories cannot do with 80 majority at the House of Parliament with this, I don't know when will they be able to do that. Mr. Mayor, the Labour Group budget proposal is not about just the figures, it's about also making decisions and taking the right decisions to support our residents in the borough. We therefore demand that the Conservative leadership to re-establish Grenfell Scrutiny Committee, as it will not cost for the time being anything for them, simply because we have a scrutiny system in place which can be adopted for the next year. The reason why we are suggesting the Grenfell scrutiny to be established is because we have divided, or the Conservative leadership have divided a single Grenfell-related issue into 5 different committees, which confuses not only the bereaved families, survivors, and the wider Kensington and Chelsea, but also for the people who are making the right decisions. Mr. Mayor, we have a wonderful community, a diverse community in RBKC, and we are grateful to be living in this borough. We therefore should be working together for all of us to make sure our borough becomes one of the best places to live, work, and study. And research and development is the key to do that. Speaking of research, Mr. Mayor, allow me this opportunity to congratulate our...
1 minute.
1 minute, thank you. Speaking of research, Mr. Mayor, allow me to congratulate our former MP and the current sitting councillor for Goulburn for completing her 2 research and hopefully coming out with her book of One Kensington. And that book hopefully will be a guide for new councillors to cut the inequality for our borough, to support local research and supporting. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I wish to thank and wish them all the best for the retiring members of this council, in particular Councillor Pat Mason, who was the leader for the last 2 years, and also Councillor Judith Blakeman, who's been very supportive when I joined the council, as well as Councillor Robert Freeman, who was a member of the Housing and Communities since when I was last year. So I wish to thank them, as well as Martin Cover, officer who has been working with us. Thank you, Martin, for your time. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Siren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This budget has at its heart our residents, their needs and their voices and their families. It is our priority to ensure that our residents are at the heart of our council priorities and therefore our budget. And we are working across the borough to listen to our residents, to understand how to support recovery from COVID, how to partner with our voluntary and community sector, and how to remove barriers to civic participation, especially for our minority groups. I think we are already engaging with our residents in different ways, and we definitely are stepping outside the box and engaging with them more on their terms. Our priority is to widen community participation, hearing from a range of voices to make sure our initiatives reflect our residents' priorities. We now also have a representative citizens panel of 2,000 residents, which seeks residents' views on priority issues such as the local green plan and care and wellbeing services. Mr. Mayor, a priority of this budget is the ongoing funding for the community-led recovery from the Grenfell disaster. This year, we will spend £9 million on year 3 of the Grenfell recovery strategy. For the bereaved and survivors, our focus will be on implementing the changes that they have told us they want to see, following the wide-ranging review of the dedicated service that took place last year. This means increasing choice and control for all of those who use the service, targeting support to those who need it most, and improving the way we engage and communicate with all the bereaved and survivors. We continue to involve our various programmes, for example, the Grenfell Project Fund, with the formation of resident steering groups. Community governance is also evolving. Residents are leading on the delivery and monitoring of this programme. We have resident-led panels on other projects, for example, the development of the bays at Maxilla and the Curve Legacy Fund. We are very grateful to all of our partners, especially to more than 80 local organisations involved in the delivery of the Grenfell Recovery Programme, for their role in making many of the projects and programmes happen. Mr. Mayor, throughout the pandemic, council staff have worked hard in very difficult circumstances. They have strengthened relationships across the borough, connecting the VCS and cultural groups with other relevant organisations. To provide for the Grenfell Recovery Framework, we've set aside £8 million, of which we are projected to spend £1.4 million this year, and the rest as we navigate through the coming years. As we look ahead beyond the restrictions that we've all had to endure, now is the time for renewed multi-agency partnerships to tackle the damage left behind by the crisis. For example, we are tackling the drivers of food insecurity through a number of initiatives, including the bringing together of partners from information and advice agencies into some of our food banks to support our residents out of crisis into a more stable situation. Another big highlight of our initiatives is our initiatives with our young people who are bringing their voice to our plans. Our Youth Council, the Youth Mayor and the Young Ambassadors all play an important role in our local democracy, and we welcome their challenge and their thoughts on the work that this council does. Mr. Mayor, the COVID pandemic is just one of many challenges that our communities have recently faced, and we've benefited from the incredible support of our local voluntary and community sector. From addressing long-standing needs like providing support for our vulnerable residents to new situations like helping Afghan evacuees, they are a pillar of strength in our borough. Mr. Mayor, this is a budget that enhances our inclusive and vibrant borough. It aids the recovery of those in need while drawing strength from the rich tapestry of our residents. We owe it to them to spend our council tax wisely on those most in need, and that is precisely what we are doing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I fully support this budget.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kamali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was disappointed that this evening the current leader of the Labour Party chose to start his speech by sharing a private case but without even bringing it to me before the meeting started. It's obviously political point-scoring evening. To that end, for the viewers at home, perhaps they're unable to see, but there's been the sort of aptly parting of the Red Sea on the Labour benches tonight. The Labour group in their budgets have pointed out a few issues. They believe we should tackle drug use in the borough. The Labour mayor is decriminalising drug use in London. They believe we should tackle inequalities in the borough. The Labour mayor is putting up his share of council tax by over 8%. And they believe that those least able to pay should subsidise those needing home care in the borough. And I think this is just wrong. I think what we have is a budget here tonight that is of a caring council, one which is looking out for its residents, being aware of the fact that a number of our residents have more means than others, and making sure that we are standing here to support them. Mr. Mayor, I would also like to start tonight by thanking the Adult Social Care and Public Health team for the work that they have done over what seems like a decade, but has only been 2 years. As we move forward and we start to learn to live with COVID, we need to ensure that the systems that we've put in place locally for our health and care services are even more resilient going into the future and into the unknown. I would like to highlight 3 central pillars of our approach for the coming year, namely ensuring that our services have the resources they need to respond to upcoming social care reforms and pressure caused by the pandemic, getting shovels in the ground with capital investments to ensure we have the facilities in place for residents to access care that they need close to home, and embedding public health across the whole council, acknowledging that good health and well-being is more than just physical health. Next year, we will be spending over £69 million on statutory and preventative adult care services for over 2,800 service users in the borough. And as well as that, as a council, we are ensuring that we are forward planning for the social care reforms. Social care reforms, I might add, that have been brought about by a Conservative government with the 80-seat majority that was referenced by Councillor Ali, making sure that everyone is able to have the care that they need across this country.
Good luck with the next election.
To respond to these upcoming pressures, we have prudently set aside £5 million of additional budget, which will be available for both adults and children's service social care if needed. In adult social care, we expect it may be needed to support our social care providers. And I was alongside Councillor Folkes today at a care fair that we've hosted, looking at bringing local jobs into the borough, working for our local care providers. The government guidance, which was introduced last year to speed up hospital discharges, is also creating additional pressures on our social care budget. And this is likely to continue into the next year, and it makes sense that we plan accordingly. As such, we will also be putting aside an additional £500,000 into the revenue budget to support young people that are transitioning into adult care, supporting people with much greater complexity of care, and the increasing number of residents needing support for their mental well-being. With more residents using our services, we need to plan ahead. That's why we're pushing ahead with our capital investments to get shovels in the ground in Lotts Road and at Maxilla, the latter of which we've already allocated over £5 million in next year's budget. We have also been bidding for the purchase of Notting Hill Police Station to retain this as a community asset. This will provide vital facilities, another point they may wish to raise with the London Labour Mayor. Mr. Mayor, we know that good health is shaped by more than a single public health team supporting a diverse community with complex health challenges. We need to consider the broader determinants that shape health and well-being. This council is therefore committed to a whole council approach to public health, meaning that every interaction with residents, every policy, every programme provides an opportunity to improve health and well-being for our residents. That's why we have reprioritised over £1 million of public health funding to be shared across the council directorates, cross-cutting and making sure that we're building on our commitment to having health in all of our policies, not least in youth violence, air quality and physical activity, as these are the things our residents have told us are the biggest priorities for them. Mr. Mayor, with these proactive and forward-thinking investments, despite upcoming reforms and challenges, this council will have the right mechanisms in place to create even healthier and better supported communities as we move forward from the COVID-19 pandemic. We are committed to demonstrating to our residents that we are being led by their priorities and that KNC cares. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thaxter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you mind if I sit? I've got a leg injury. I just wanted to just touch on air quality in our borough that needs significant improvement. We need to take serious measures to ensure this takes effect. We need to reinstate safe lanes throughout the borough, including Kensington High Street. We need an alternative roadmap, different from what the council's doing. This will promote active travel and save the government millions in the challenge to fight obesity. We should enforce car-free days, implement walk corners, encourage growth, grow our own projects and plants for more trees. Recycling is a major issue in our borough. We need to introduce an educational program throughout schools and communities to address the waste management and process, reducing waste and increase recycling and food composting. Dispose of domestic waste properly to reduce rodents in our borough. We can bring in additional expertise and capacity to develop and deliver this program. Safe and able should be maintained. We need to reverse the 118 savings from the ending of the police contract and restate the contract in place and maintain the additional police officers, the PSCLs. Ever since Grenfell, we've had huge amount of soil contamination. Since then, we've changed the way we scrutinize. This has been having a huge impact on our residents and the environment due to decision made by the Conservative leadership team. The Labour Party, the Labour Group, demands the establishment of scrutiny committee as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Wade.
This budget was predicated on a 3% inflation, and now inflation is running at 5.4%, and this without the impact of predicted energy increase being taken into consideration. I would query, given the level of uncertainty, doesn't the contingency reserve or safety net of 3.6 million mentioned look small? And should there not be an opportunity to present amendments given the changing circumstances? The report states there's very limited understanding of the implication and impact of net zero carbon obligations and objectives. It is therefore fair to assume that little factored into the budget, which is problematic, I would think, as there are only 7 budget cycles left until 2030. Given the 2 points above, wouldn't it make sense to start reviewing some of the assumptions behind the present resident parking permit strategy? Does it still make sense to have such a favourable and cheap tariff for all parking permits when we want to promote and encourage more sustainable travel, and cars have such an impact on air quality? For years, this council has charged the adult social care precept, but cut the adult social care budget. The pandemic has revealed hidden needs that require support, but also raises concern about the standard of care and support delivered. For years, this budget has been underspent, and with little invested in this significant growth area. I feel that we should be revisiting the entire sector to include accommodation, day and care centres, care worker and specialist care provision that cover the whole of the borough, not because most of it is centred in the north. At present, the capital investment programme is not aligned with the needs of the borough. Net carbon objectives include air quality provision for schools, should extend to all insulation for borough homes, green wall enhancements, entering into a different relationship with RSLs, firstly to fund improvements to properties to ensure all homes are safe, secure and warm, secondly to financially partner them to prevent the sale of RSL home properties on void properties or purchase to prevent loss. A comprehensive, coherent, borough-wide cycle path scheme has to come into place. Given the changes in working lives, investment in creches and nurseries, afternoon and holiday play provision is essential to support families of working parents. We're facing empty high streets at a time when more residents are working from home and need more local businesses and services. We therefore need to invest to attract and retain independent retailers and SMEs. Kensington and Chelsea has a lot of talent, sole traders, independents and entrepreneurs. We need to support this group and enable them to grow and succeed through business support hubs throughout the borough. The new homes programme is defined as a key council priority, but it's unclear in this report how it's actually going to impact financial priorities and funding allocations, and whether current budget assumptions allowed to meet the council's objectives.
1 minute, please.
Nearly finished. In terms of housing, is there actual room to manoeuvre given the obligation for the programme of self-financing? Finally, we've long advocated that there should be a private landlord registration to ensure properties are at rentable standard and comply with all relevant certification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Taylor-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I start by just again thanking Dan Hawthorne, Director of Housing, and all the officers for the hard work that they've gone into not only the year but also in preparing on this budget. So I want to start really, I want to talk about Section 10 and about housing, and I think this addresses the mantra that I keep hearing and sadly repeated by Councillor Bakhtiar, that nothing has changed in this borough. Well, you know, I believe there's credible evidence to suggest that's fundamentally wrong. I mean, housing, property and social investment are the core of what we do at RBKC, and over the next year we are planning to spend £57.9 million on housing services alone, and that doesn't even take into account the capital monies that we're going to be spending on improving our council stock. So the budget goes to preventing homelessness, providing temporary accommodation when prevention is not possible, allocating housing and housing solutions, incorporating the principles of social investment throughout this council, and importantly, our capital programme and investing and building new affordable homes. And temporary accommodation is a crucial lifeline for over 2,000 residents, and we need it right now. And although it would be better for everybody to move straight into social housing as being suggested, the social housing crisis, especially in RBKC, at this stage, is just not going to allow us to do that. So that's why 9.4 million of this goes towards the lifeline in the next year. And importantly, we are and we will continue to reduce the number of households that live in temporary accommodation through our homeless prevention strategy and through the New Homes programme. And in the coming year, Mr Mayor, the homeless reduction strategy adopted in 2022 will deliver budget reductions of £896,000, principally due to the fact we have fewer households in temporary accommodation. But this work, it does not immediately dissolve the need for temporary accommodation. The support is still very much the key. And funding is the key to these households who find themselves left with nowhere to call a home. And so for this reason, the capital pipeline includes 25 million this current year for the purchase of temporary accommodation to increase supply. Now, it was very good of Councillor Dent Code to give us a story about the ancient town, Roman town of Peterborough. In fact, the story was almost as ancient as the town, about why we buy temporary accommodation. And the answer is to increase the supply of secure accommodation. And it's supply that we own. It's not supply that we rent. And the rent that households in temporary accommodation go to pay, accommodation rent, will fund the debt that will enable us to buy the properties. It won't be the same as far as social rent. But anyway, saving money. So this is all about saving money and giving a better service and better outcomes for our residents without cutting service provision. And that's exactly what we're achieving here. So turning to social investment, this is all about getting better outcomes for residents with limited resources. The recently opened Building Lives Academy is a great example of that. You know, a construction academy that dedicated to teaching young people the skills they need to go into career construction. And £125,000 has been allocated in our budget to develop this social strategy over the next year. And I look forward to seeing a lot more projects like this starting in this year. We also have 425 properties owned by the council, all of which contribute a significant amount of money to this budget and funding services and allow us to provide benefits for our community. So, Mr Mayor, as you know, I'm very passionate about building homes for our registered, homes that are affordable, homes that are safe, and homes that our residents can be proud to call a home. And 154 million has been set aside in the capital budget to build these new homes through the New Homes programmes. 600 homes, minimum 300 at social rent. Yeah. So the New Homes programmes, I fully acknowledge, has not been smooth sailing. And where we have heard residents' concerns, as we did at a previous council meeting here, we have stopped. We paused to look at how we can design things again with the community. And this inevitably has had an impact on the budget of the New Homes programme. However, it will always remain a high priority. So the high need for housing to support
1 minute, please.
It's been the highest house prices. We've got the highest prices in Europe. So anyway, I'm going to write on just a couple of comments on the Labour budget, which I thought I would just bring. Is first of all, proposal number 12 is I just don't understand why you're not supporting this saving. And it seems somewhat nonsensical that a Labour group that supported the recruitment of staff last year to make savings in homelessness is now saying to a successful prevention programme that has delivered savings, is now saying that we should reverse this and we should sack the staff. I mean, it's unconceivable. And to add that on section 12, you're also proposing to spend more money on preventing homelessness through working with private landlords, but save it on temporary. It just doesn't work out. Very counterintuitive.
Councillor Taylor-Smith.
I will just finish on one other thing, just on the fire safety officers, which talks about there's only one dedicated fire officer in housing management. That is simply not true. Fire safety in our borough is supported by 12-strong team with a statutory risk assessments outsourced to third parties. And this is already factored into our budget and provides the requisite level of expertise wherever necessary. And a contingency budget is also available to meet new requirements as they arrive. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Sorry to overrun.
Councillor Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's start. I will eventually learn how this system works. Mr Mayor, I have been listening to the budgets of this council for 30 years, and it is indeed true. I'll do the jokes. It is indeed true that some things have changed, but other things that haven't changed. And one of the things that I find really depressing about this council is that for 30 years you have been saying, we're not going to spend money as is needed this year because something bad might happen next year. That has always been the theme of this council, whereas I have always taken the view that if you have needs now, you meet them, and then you look again next year what the needs are and what the money is that needs to be available. Now, this has become more difficult because the Conservative government insists on giving grants or support on only a single-year basis. Now, when you've been lucky enough to have Labour governments give you spending programmes or government money which goes on for 4, 5, 6 years. And there's been some cheap remarks tonight about the Mayor of London, and the reason he has to put up the precept is simply because national government will not give him the money which is needed for the capital. And I think we will see this when the well, let's have a look at what the elections show us across London in May. Now, the thing, I mean, it's most unfortunate that the Labour spokesman on adult services isn't here tonight because, as we all know, that's the area that takes up half of this council's expenditure. There's a couple of things that I would like to highlight from our proposals for tonight. We bring back for the third, if not the fourth year, our proposal to have free personal care. And as we say to you every single year, if Hammersmith, which is far poorer than we are, can do it and has made a success of it, it would be useful if this council at least considered it and looked at their example. Because we have an elderly population in this borough, and many of the elderly of this borough have to leave because they cannot be supported in their homes. And as has been said, I mean, I think we've been gone back perhaps too often to old examples tonight. But as Councillor Emmerdent Code pointed out at one point, this council has ended up exporting our elderly people out of the borough in their final years, and they end up living in an industrial estate in Acton. I think that was the example she gave. So free personal care would make a vast difference to people irrespective of income across this borough. The other thing I would like to draw attention to is the needs to improve the employment possibilities of those who give personal care. And I'm very pleased that you did have, and I gather it was successful, I'm pleased that you had your fair today. Well, that's a start, and I hope that the paper that was brought to adult services, which considered this to some extent, it needs some more work, but I hope you will bring it back to the main council, because we do need to look about how to make working in personal care more attractive. Now, you have made facilities for private providers. Now, I think that we need to look again at ourselves providing a training programme and perhaps go back for direct employment of care workers, as indicated by Councillor Wade earlier. Now, we've had some mention of having a construction academy. I think we should have a personal care academy as well. Now, so that people will be attracted to the job and do it, because as it is at the moment, people do it out of desperation, which is not a grounds for taking care of our vulnerable people. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I also wanted to speak on what was happening with the educational expenditure here. I would like us very much to find, and I know you found some more money for special educational needs, and you have improved to some extent on speeding up the assessment, but it is very wrong that it takes a very long time for children with educational needs in our schools to be properly assessed and for the money to then come through to the schools. And this means that very often that when schools take a vulnerable child without the funding, because the funding's not ready, that child has to be paid for out of the general budget of the schools. And it's not fair that the schools who generously take children with needs then don't get the payment in a speedy matter. Finally, Mr. Mayor, there's been some reference to looking again at the school's transportation review. I hope we're going to be very careful about that, because the last time we looked at the school's transportation review, as the leader of the council will remember, we had absolute chaos and we had vulnerable children scrambling around trying to find. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start with an observation. I'm pretty sure at the beginning of this session you asked speakers to be brief, but nobody seems to have paid a blind bit of notice to you. Seeing as
Everybody
this is going
stuck
to be
to their 5 minutes.
Seeing as this is going to be the last time I'm talking to you in the full council, I would like you to remember me as somebody who listened to you and kept his speech brief.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Moving on to the budget. I'm in awe of this budget. Having spent the last 4 years in the Audit and Transparency Committee, where obviously we look at the accounts post the budget, and the last 3.5 years after Councillor Husband kindly handed over the chairmanship to me, without telling me that it meant that I had to sign the actual accounts. There's nothing that focuses your mind of signing the accounts to know exactly what goes into the budget and hence the accounts. This budget is very complex and very hard to balance. But the reason I'm in awe is because we're only increasing the council tax by 0.99%. And I stress that every 1% we effectively leave on the table, that's 1% in perpetuity. So it's not a small decision to make, and it's 1% we'll never get back. I consider myself to be a low-tax Tory, but this is very brave in my book. This council has spent the last 3 years cutting costs, improving efficiencies, while still maintaining the excellent service delivery it has, and also still finding money for institutions and organisations like the Citizens Advice Bureau, for which I, as a trustee, am very thankful for. But I worry that next year is going to be harder, next year is going to be different. Maybe it's because I spend too much time doing the risk register on the Audit and Transparency Committee, which I'm sure Councillor Williams will agree with me, has got to such an overwhelming proportion, it's difficult to know where to start. My great fear is inflation, and to join the triumvirate of doom between Councillor Lindsay and Councillor Wade, I am very, very concerned that we are not going to finish at 5.2%, and it's not going to be a flash in the pan, and that it will continue to go up. Only today I got a lovely letter from SSE, who I get my energy from, informing me that my direct debit will be going up by 40%. That hasn't even started yet. That is not even counted for, baked into the inflation numbers of 5.2 or 5.4%. It's coming. My generation has limited experience of inflation. We have been very unfortunate. But looking around the room at some of the grey hairs, I know that many of you will remember the 70s and remember inflation and remember... no offence meant to anyone. This is a very serious issue. Fortunately, I was fortunate to have experience in the developing world where we would do our budgets and do our forecasts, and one of the biggest variables on there would be the inflation number. And we would have a stab at whatever it's going to be, between 4% to 8%, and have a guess at what it's going to be. We've been caught napping in the UK because we're so used to effectively zero inflation. And now it's going to be very, very different. I know that the officers have done some sterling work in pouring through the contracts that we have in place, seeing which are CPI inflation linked, and so that in future we can adjust our budgets and give a better forecast based on what inflation is going to be. But I urge you to please redouble your efforts, because I don't think this is going to be a flash in the pan. Mr. Mayor, I fully support this budget, unamended, but I'm also very happy that in 18 months' time I'm not going to be the Audit and Transparency Chair signing off these accounts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is also my final speech, and I think I can be even briefer than Ian. As many of you know, the environment is still a huge passion for me, so you won't be surprised to hear that my final words are going to be dedicated to that issue. And I wanted to voice my support for the commitments made in this budget to see through our targets for a net zero and a greener borough. We have made some really good progress over the last 4 years, but we all know there's a very long way to go, and that is, I think, reflected in this budget. But I really want to take this opportunity just to thank you, and I'm very sorry to have missed the start of this evening, and I think that's a very clear example as to why, sadly, I've had to come to the conclusion to stand down. It was with a very heavy heart that I decided to stand down. It's been a huge privilege to work alongside you all. This borough is incredibly lucky to have people like yourselves who care so deeply for its residents and our community. I also want to just thank a few people in particular Councillor Schmetterling, for the people who don't work closely with Dory. He has a heart of gold, and he's worked and still does to this day and will continue to do so very, very hard to represent his constituents with real passion. I also want to thank Councillor Campbell for her leadership over the last 4 years, and all the lead members, in particular Jem and Johnny, who've had to hear me bang on about the environment many times. And thank you all to all you colleagues from all parties for showing me the ropes from the beginning and inspiring me, and I wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you.
I commend the budget.
Councillor Folkes, the final speech, and then we'll go to summing up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This budget demonstrates just how much this council respects and recognises how important our businesses and our high streets are. And I really appreciate that, because I think that's something new to have this department, this portfolio that I'm lead member of, for economy, employment and innovation, to have a funded portfolio that has actually made such a huge difference in the last 4 years. I've been only too aware of the incredible impact that COVID has had on our businesses in the borough, and I have been totally in awe of their resilience and their innovation and how they've had to pivot their businesses to cope with it. So I've been delighted to be that this borough has been so supportive of those businesses through that time. We've built up business forums, we've made new and strong relationships with our businesses that we've never had before, that we're sharing information, helping and supporting them. And I'm really proud that we've been doing that. And we've also, and this is really the sort of jewel of the crown from this department, is that we have developed and supported 3 business improvement districts in this borough in under 2 years, which will deliver £16 million of investment in our high streets. So it's just fantastic news. So we've encouraged people to come back to our high streets by encouraging pop-ups, by planters and benches. And I thought it was sad that Councillor Wade said that the high streets weren't busy anymore. I don't think she's been out, because I've been out, and the high streets are absolutely thriving with people at the moment. And we've done the footfall, and the numbers are up to 98% as they were pre-COVID. And I think a lot of that has been down to what we have been doing in this council. I'm slightly surprised by the Labour Party's budget picking on the flower stall in South Kensington, of not wanting to fund that. We all recognise that markets are something that people really love in this borough. They love the Portobello Road and the Goldmoor Market. They love these individual market stalls. And this market is replacing a rather fallen down stall that was in South Kensington Station. the most popular and visited station in this borough. It was requested by local residents. It's providing a location for a small local business. It will look lovely in terms of public realm and greening the environment outside the Kennedy Station. And more than that, it will bring in £18,000 worth of rent, and in 5 years will have paid for itself and continue to bring in rent. I also wanted to talk about what we've done for employment and opportunities. We've invested in 2 new members of staff, one specifically building up our relationships with business to bring opportunities such as apprenticeships, traineeships, kickstart opportunities into this borough, and another one who specifically works on apprenticeship. And Councillor Bakhtiar mentioned that we weren't doing nothing about apprenticeships. We're doing a huge amount with apprenticeships. In fact, at the care fair where we were, Councillor Kamali and ourselves this morning, where that was a care fair, there were 600 jobs available in that care fair that our local residents could have accessed. And the companies that were there were offering, Councillor Atkinson, training, in-job training, progression, learning and skills. So actually, there's no point in the council spending money on an academy when that's already being done by the recruitment agencies in the care sector. So I wanted to address that. The libraries. We know that 800,000 people every year
1 minute, please.
use our libraries, and that they are an incredibly important asset in the borough. And I want to make clear here and now that we have no, I repeat, commitment to close. We have no idea that we're going to close any of them. We're committed to keeping all 6 libraries open. And that's why you will see in the budget that we're investing 600,000, a capital investment, in creating more spaces for the community to use in our libraries and creating a virtual library, which will mean that those residents who can't physically be in our libraries can actually access all the material that's in them from their own home, which we're supporting with other digital effects to do. So I'm running out of time, but I wanted to thank the staff that I've been working with. The officers have all been fantastic, have worked so hard to support our businesses, our high streets, our libraries, and getting people back into employment in this borough over the last 2 years. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. They have done so much for everyone. And I want to finish by saying I fully support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to summing up, and I call upon Councillor Bakhtiar to sum up on the Labour amendments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Mayor of London was mentioned many times this evening, and he was under attack. I am not here to defend him, but just to remind you that if Mayor of London was a Conservative, the central government would have behaved differently. They gave him more funds, yes. So this is the fact. And all of the government cuts on the mayor, that's why he's doing what he's doing. Second point, I would like to thank our finance officers for doing a fantastic job, and all council officers in general, and specifically Taryn Eves, who has been fantastic, always there whenever we had a question, and she was there to assist us. In our budget, we proposed to have, we had a speaker, public speaker, mentioned something very important. Our privately rented tenants, they are in trouble and they need basic advice and support, and we don't have this at the council. We should have officers, a department, helping our privately rented tenants in the council. That's why it's there. We've ended 1/4, 25% of children who live in the borough live in poverty. We need to focus on them. We need to help them to advance academically. The case I have mentioned, Councillor Kamali, is to say it's. I didn't mention names. A case to illustrate we have a big problem, which it's much better dealt with at Hammersmith. If they could do it, we could do it here as well. So we need to look after and have free in-house at least to those who've been working entire life in the borough and now they cannot afford the bill. And again, finally, I would say, yes, there are good boxes, right boxes ticked. We need to worry about the 20 or 25% who are not doing well in the borough. Students, children, and families, and single parents specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wheel, you would like to sum up, please.
I'd just like to echo those thanks to finance officers, particularly to Mike and Tarin. I think one of the things that they have really tried to do is make all our papers accessible to everybody so that our residents can read and understand and criticise them and input into what we do. And I'm really grateful for that. But we're also always open to suggestions about how we can improve. I want to thank the OSC for their suggestions, particularly their concerns surrounding inflation, which were then reflected in this budget in a special contingency. And colleagues across the chamber for all their suggestions. I have to say I found the Labour budget both baffling and in some ways predictable. Yeah. Don't they always take the easy way out? A raid on contingency and reserves. And in fact, I did work out that if they continue to accelerate their use of reserves, I think they tripled them this time from the amount they suggested last time. If they continue that tripling, we'll be straight out of reserves in 4 years' time. Quite a magnificent set of aspirations. And some of it I just found baffling. I mean, 5B, in one sentence, it's raising money and spending money. I just wonder if they needed someone to sort of edit it. So I think in summary, I can suggest that we reject this amendment on the grounds that it's lazy, it doesn't even bother to suggest how the capital programme might be reduced revenue spending by 350,000 in any sensible detail. It's feckless. It rests on reserves and contingency, and it's irresponsible. Where it does add to our base budget, it takes no cognizance of the fact that many of our grants may fall out next year. Of course, all of this nonsense is the privilege of opposition, but it's not sensible opposition. So I urge my colleagues to turn this amendment down and vote for the real budget.
Thank you very much. So we now turn to the votes, and I'm afraid the normal budget we do electronic voting to record the names. The electronic voting is not working, so when I ask you to show hands, can you please keep your hands up so that the officers can record who's voting? So I will remind members that votes on the 2 Labour amendments and the revenue budget, capital budget and council tax need to be recorded, as we say. Therefore, there will be 3 votes. So the first vote is on the Labour amendment to the revenue budget. Would those in favour of the Labour amendment please raise their hand and keep them raised while officers record the vote? Thank you. Would those against the vote, against the Labour amendments, please raise their hands and keep them raised? Thank you. Are there any? I'm just about to say. Are there any abstentions? Can you keep your hand up so it's properly recorded, please? This is getting very... So the voting is as follows. Thank you. For the amendment 10, against the amendment 27, abstentions 1, and therefore I call the amendment is defeated. So, vote on the Labour amendment to the capital programme. The second vote on the Labour amendment to the capital programme. Would those in favour of the Labour amendment please raise their hand and keep them raised? Councillor Siren, are you... I suspect we can just do ditto of this, can't we? But nevertheless, let's do it democratically. Thank you. Would those against the Labour amendment please raise their hands and keep them raised? Thank you. Are there any abstentions? Thank you. The voting is as follows: 4, 10, against 27, abstentions 1. Therefore, I declare the amendment lost. So, vote on the Revenue Budget, Capital Programme and Council Tax 2022-23. The Council has before its recommendations set in paragraph 2.2, Report 8 from the Leadership Team. Would those in favour of the recommendations please raise their hands and keep them raised while officers record the vote? Thank you. Would those against the recommendation please raise their hand and keep them raised? Thank you. Are there any abstentions? The voting is as follows. No, it's not the same. So 427 against 10, abstentions 1, and therefore I declare the recommendations carried. Thank you. We now move to the HRA Budget 2022-23. I call upon Councillor Taylor-Smith to move the reception of the report and the leader to second, please.
I beg to move, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor-Smith, do you wish to speak?
I do, and I will try and be a lot shorter than before. So, Mr. Mayor, to quote paragraph 4.4, the budget has been set in the context of a fairly challenging outlook for the HRA given the future capital plans, and this is obviously necessary to make sure our tenants are living in safe, quality homes, and clearly that's going to deserve an awful lot of money. So our repairs provision of maintenance alone is £14.8 million, and our forecast spend for the HRA of the coming year is £86 million and £100 million the year after. And those are unprecedented amounts, never been spent before. And the largest element of this budget is being spent on improving the quality of our stock. And we've increased the level of capital investment in our stock significantly. So, I mean, if we cast our mind back to going back when housing management was managed through the TMO, you know, there was a capital programme of only £10 million a year, and that shows obviously the need and the difference in terms of approach. So this includes a huge increase. This is needed to ensure safe and decent homes, and I would not like to see this reduced at the expense of our residents. So residents are facing an extraordinary cost of living crisis. Food prices are increasing, bills are increasing, and then people have to decide between eating or heating. And I think the latest forecasts that are coming out from the Bank of England are suggesting that we might get to 7% in the spring. So we know that this is a reality, and we know that this is going to put pressure on our residents. And our residents will be dealing with these increases in cost of living, just as the council is going to be dealing with the same inflationary pressures with regard to our construction costs and our maintenance costs. So we don't want to let these increases or costs get in the way of improving our costs and the well-being and the safety of our residents. And across London, social rents are being increased by 4.1%, and we'll be raising rents by the same amount. So increasing the rent by this amount is what is needed to set a balanced budget and to maintain the programme of improvements that we currently have. And this increase equates on average to about £5 a week. And we work to ensure that it doesn't put undue pressure on our residents. Now, a large majority of our residents, at 70%, are on receipt of universal credit or housing benefits, which means that they'll receive additional benefit entitlements to cover that. But the remaining 30% of the tenants will not receive these benefits, and they will suffer this increase. And we have to look at ways of how we might support. Well, one way of mitigating this impact is by looking at our heating and hot water charges, which we can see are going to set, they're already increasing and they will set to increase again. And here we've decided as a council to cap that maximum more than £5 a week in the upcoming financial year. And we'll also be using other initiatives such as the LIFT dashboard, which helps us identify households with fuel poverty, so we can undertake targeted campaigns with them. And the Housing and Employment team will support residents with income maximisation, and that again looks at fuel poverty. And we could also look at the household fund to support, and applying for other grants such as utility debt grants and hardship grants will all help. So, Mr. Mayor, to conclude, the Council is doing much more than these few examples when we recognise the impact of the cost of living is going to have on our residents. And we're committed to support our residents in every way we can. So I commend the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to speak on this? Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few points, and I'll keep this one very brief. The London Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has been mentioned a couple of times. But what the Conservative Party is not mentioning is the money that we have received from the Mayor. Millions of pounds from the Mayor's grant to allow us to build new homes in this borough. We couldn't have gone for the 600 properties that we're building, or 600 new homes that we're building in the borough without the support of Mayor Sadiq Khan. And I think everyone in this chamber would appreciate that support and will agree with me. We thank the London Labour Mayor for helping Londoners to have a safe and decent homes for their current and future generations. The second point of this plan is, Mr. Mayor, the New Homes Programme itself. As we've mentioned earlier, we have more than 3,000 people in the housing registration and over 2,000 in the temporary accommodations. And as the Labour Group feels this project is not, or this plan is not providing adequate social housing, therefore we will not be supporting on this. In fact, we will be going against. And the final point is the Edenham Way project. The Conservative leadership has failed to negotiate or to speak to or to work with to co-design of the proposed skyscrapers they have proposed there without the support of the local. So we will ask the Conservative leadership to go back to the drawing board and work with the local residents and to make sure that the new homes will be built in Edenham Way that both supports the local people as well as generating future funds for the council. Therefore, we are going against. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Taylor-Smith, do you wish to sum up that?
No, Mr. Mayor, I have no further comments to make. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Pascal, do you want to make a quick point, please?
Yes, if I could just welcome the inclusion of the carbon zero funding that's included in here, and that the further work that's indicated that will be done by the funding strategy report, a medium-term financial strategy this summer, because there's still a lot of work which officers are doing and need to, it's been stated here they'll continue to do this and report in the summer. And I welcome that's been included in this report, and thereby I support this budget.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, briefly, when it comes to energy efficiency, and point well made, Councillor Pascal, when it comes to the New Homes Programme, the Council is cavalier to the fact that skyscrapers are not energy efficient. They're 40% less energy efficient than the normal homes. So when it comes to our commitment to be carbon neutral in the next few years, and it's coming up very shortly, and we all unanimously passed a motion stating that we have a climate emergency, we cannot go ahead with plans to build skyscrapers not only against the will of local residents, none of whom support them, but against basic logic and science.
Thank you. So we now move to the recommendation. Is the recommendation in paragraph 4.2 of report 8 agreed? Thank you. Not agreed, okay. It's not a vote, this one, it's agreed, but you're not agreed, okay. Annual Treasury Management Strategy 2022-23. I asked everybody if they agreed. We now turn to item 8.4 of the Leadership Team Report, the Annual Treasury Management Strategy for 2022-23. I call upon Councillor Wheel to move the adoption of the report and the leader to second.
I'd like to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Wheel, do you wish to speak?
I think Councillor Kamali just said to me, oh, this is going to be exciting. I honestly don't think he was being very, very generous. But really, I just want to get up and say we continue our cautious approach to Treasury management. We now have professional advisors, which I think, given the complicated economic circumstances we're entering into, makes me triply glad that we've got it. And so I recommend this to the Council.
Thank you.
Would you like that?
Would anybody like to speak? Councillor Mason would like to speak.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Not very exciting, Mary, but I know I've heard that before, and that's one of the problems with the Treasury Management Strategy. The Treasury Management Statement, of course, has more often than not, in the time I've stood in this chamber, gone through on the nod, simply because people thought it was not very exciting. And because we have to do it annually, we absolutely have to do that. The capital programme, as we saw in the budget paper, 612 million over 3 years, which includes a 30% slippage plan. Of course, not many councillors will probably have read this. They'll just leave it up to the front bench, of course. And the front bench, of course, can rely on its Treasury advisor, Arlene Close, for best advice, of course, can't they? Well, obviously, yes, but since at least 2015, Mr Mayor, when the government passed the Modern Slavery Act and the Council subsequently approved its Ending Modern Slavery Strategy for 2021-26, we on this side have been asking how its principles are incorporated into an array of other Council strategies, including the Treasury Management Strategy, which I think I picked up last year. Now, when I glanced through Arlene Close's website, I could not find any mention of modern slavery, or what their policy is to identify offending companies, even though the 2015 Act requires all organisations, and I quote, with annual turnovers greater than 36 million, to publish an annual statement outlining the actions they are taking to address the potential for modern slavery in their supply chains. And we know from groups like like Anti-Slavery International, but there are others, who estimate that some 24.9 million are working in forced labour and 10 million children in slavery around the world. We know that those worst affected supply chains, only some of them, are spread through food, fashion, clothes, tobacco, tea, coffee, cotton. And there is a very long list. So I ask myself, how much of the quoted in the report 188.4 million of council money invested on the advice of Arlene Close may be invested in the sort of companies whose supply chains include slave labour? Now, I don't know, although I've asked the question in previous years, and so have my Labour colleagues, and I expect we will be told again that questions will be asked. And we have the Ending Modern Slavery Strategy, which, of course, strangely enough, it talks about local slavery, but it doesn't include the issue that I've just mentioned. Now, when the Leader of the Council spoke earlier in her statement on Ukraine and what we could do about to help there, she did say, if I've got it wrong, tell me, we will be checking on our supply chains for Russian involvement, to see if there's any Russian involvement. And by the way, good luck with that, given the way that actually works. And I think that if we can check our supply chains, our procurement chains, presumably in particular, for Russian involvement, we can check our supply chains and for slave labour involvement. And incidentally, when we talked about Ukraine earlier, which of course is a ghastly situation, and we did, I think, help during the Afghan war as well. We did some work on that. There are something like 5 different wars going on in the world, and some have been going on for at least 10 years, including Yemen, where Saudi Arabia is using ours and American weapons to bomb civilians into the dust in Saudi Arabia, and Syria, where we were actually, as Americans and British, working with terrorist groups who were bombing us and European cities, and also the Palestinians who have lost thousands and thousands of citizens in multiple attacks over many, many years. And strangely enough, I don't see this in pages all over the newspapers, but and I think that those
1 minute, please.
wars should be given the same prominence as Ukraine, and then maybe there would be something, there would be some action will be taken on those. So I think on the anti-slavery thing, if we're investing 188.4 million, and this council has said in this chamber that we are against that, and we have a strategy, I think that Arlene Close should be asked, to audit the investments, how our money is invested in what companies, to find out if we are actually supporting something that this council is absolutely implacably against and has said so.
Time, please.
I think that is an action for the next council, because we can't on the one hand say we oppose something but support it in another way, and that should go right across all those council strategies and policies that we have.
Thank you. Councillor Wheel, do you wish to sum up or go straight to the vote? Okay. So is the recommendation set out in paragraph 5.2 of report 8 from the leadership team adopted? Now I'm asking the whole chamber for this. Is it adopted? Labour Group abstain. Okay, thank you. I'm informed that unfortunately I did skip an item on the agenda, item 8.3, HRA business plan. So I call upon Councillor Taylor-Smith to move the reception of the report and the leader to second.
Beg to move.
Like to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do you wish to introduce this, or do you want to go straight to the...
No, I think we can go straight. I covered the area of the business plan within my first speech. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So is the recommendation in paragraph 4.2 of report 8 agreed? Against by the Labour Group. Okay, agreed by the Conservative Group. Councillor Wade, what would you like to do on this one? Okay. So we now move to item 9, the report of Council side committees, report of the Administration Committee. I call upon the leader to move the reception of the report and Councillor Thalasitis to second.
I'd like to move the reception, Mr. Mayor.
And I'd like to second.
Okay. So
papers on this on the Administration Committee, and as of 1 o'clock today they were not on the council website. I received my council agenda last night late, so I would like to have spoken on this item, but I have not been able to because I haven't had time to read it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blakeman, and your comments have been noted. Thank you. So to call upon paragraph 1, the Chief Executive on Organisational Culture and Management Practices. Would anybody like to speak on this? Proposer or seconder, would you want to introduce it? Move to general discussion. Councillor Dent-Code.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I dive into my criticism of this report, which I must, I would like to say that I do not and would never entirely blame the output of senior officers who don't have the luxury of defending themselves when it's the leadership team who should be held accountable. The Labour Group finds this report disappointing. You don't need to read far to see that rather than reporting on exciting progress, there's yet more rallying for improvements. It kicks off with rather unsatisfactory comments such as we need to continue to embed organisational culture change that began, etc. And we need to continue to listen to the voices and perspectives of Grenfell bereaved and survivors. The Grenfell bereaved and survivors do not think that they have been started to listen to, many of them. After nearly 5 years, many in North Ken are still looking for culture change and they are still waiting to be listened to, especially when those, not exhausted by the endless meaningless consultation events, and they do actually have the energy to speak out, are then told they are not representative. Many are actively demanding the return of the Grenfell Recovery Scrutiny Committee, as we have been since May 2019, and we support that. Some of the comments I've heard attributed to leadership team members sound, quite frankly, pre-Grenfell era. It sounds like business as usual. In particular, Mr. Mayor, the inducement to recommend the Council doubles down on realising a positive organisation culture while developing new management practices. I'm not even sure what that means. I read every word of the 5 independent Grenfell Task Force reports, the 2 Kroll reports, the reviews of scrutiny and governance by the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, and have done my best with the current LGA peer review responses. I'm surprised to see that one of the LGA papers has no form of pagination to help us navigate your way through. When the CFGS comments on making documents more readable for residents, does it occur to anyone at all that this basic error should be addressed? Some more specific points. Putting the word social in front of the word investment for the title of directors doesn't mean that there is any serious intent to improve the lives of low-income earners and those unable to work. It's a misnomer. Unless you have meaningful policies that you will actually implement, you should not use the term. In relation to Grenfell's so-called recovery, we're informed that the Council adopted new corporate values, fresh approach to corporate governance. What does this mean when we have so many Grenfell-affected residents still struggling? Reshuffling governance clearly has no effect on the ground. Listen to residents and bring back that committee. We read that the Council has sought to learn from the past failings, etc., in relation to the management of council homes. Not so from the countless complaints most of us receive regularly from tenants suffering careless, rude and impatient service from some, not all, members of the housing management, and almost universally from contractors. The comments that residents and communities come first, not the council's functions or its staff, many wish it was so. The council is inward-looking, self-obsessed. Residents and communities certainly do not come first, and I've heard this, Mr. Mayor, from every corner of the borough. How interesting that the most fulsome praise has come in the context of the response to the pandemic. This positive organisational culture is within our grasp, apparently, but those so highly commended are a majority of the lower paid officers, the foot soldiers of the council, who looked after us all so tenderly throughout the pandemic. Not the senior officers and directors and leadership who left it to the last minute to take the pandemic seriously. Listen to these staff, they are our heroes. So why do we still have an ambition to strive to embed learning from the tragedy after 5 years? Apparently, the Council's committed to narrowing inequalities and differences in life chance, which is also depressing. I have a bookshelf of beautifully written Council policies on the subject since 2005, and they gather dust while inequality has worsened and life expectancy for our poorest community in the borough has dropped, according to Sir Michael Marmot, by the worst margin in the country. But I believe my colleague, Councillor Thatcher, is going to say more on that. The conclusion to double down on a series of initiatives that have so far failed to make progress is inadequate. My frustration with this report, Mr. Mayor, and its rather sad conclusion, leads me to question why there's such a lack of vision, and this should land squarely on the shoulders of the leadership team. Mr. Mayor, the
1 minute,
people,
please.
The people who could benefit the most from any real progress are those who have suffered the worst. They continue to speak out, and they continue to be undermined, discredited, and to have their voice drowned out by a cacophony of upbeat and very expensive PR. This is not a recipe for change. It's a means to control and silence those who speak out for their neighbours, and it isn't going to work.
Councillor Thaxter, do you wish to speak?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say, when I read the equality report, I was very shocked. Nothing reflects what is saying in the paper. It's just there. It's not reflecting on the ground. The Council has a duty to eliminate discrimination within the 10 characteristics of equality. Is it important for the Council to track how much money it spends? Is it important for the Council to know how many children of school age in the borough? Is it important for the Council to track how many buildings he has to maintain in the borough? Is equality important in the recruitment process, which led us to believe equality is not on the agenda? Is equality really important to the Council? And the reason I'm asking this is because I asked the question, how many African Caribbean black organizations the Council fund for over 4 months, and that information was not presented to me. How can the Council claim any equality in such case? The absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Mayor.
Thank you. Would the leader like to sum up?
Yes, I'd just like to comment briefly. First of all, I'd like to take up what Councillor Thaxter said. I'm sorry that she's shocked by the equality report, because actually on the LGA Equality Peer Review, paragraph 17, it says, In their report, peer review team concluded that good progress had been made over the last 2 years, and there is a clear focus on equalities, diversity, and inclusion internally, externally, and politically. The review team also found that political and officer leadership of the Council is committed to EDI and to making the changes needed to progress this agenda further. I'd like to turn to what Councillor Dent-Coad said. Couldn't really figure out what it had to do with the administration report. And just to remind everyone who's in the Council, the attached report sets out very clearly the main challenges the Council's management staffing. It asks all of you to note the changing environment in which the Council operates, and it encourages consideration of the overall direction of organisational change. I hope you've all read paragraph 7, and it's very clear. It sets out 6 actions which the executive management team officers will take in respect of future management arrangements at the Council. And it takes nothing for granted. It doesn't say that we've done, that we don't have progress to make. Of course we do. But we have, over the last 5 years, changed considerably. And we need to carry on embedding that change, and we need to carry on progressing. I don't see there's anything more fundamental than that. So on that basis, the only thing that the Council is being asked to do this evening is to note the report, not to agree or disagree with it, but to note it.
Thank you very much. So I ask the Council to note the report. Thank you. To call on para 2. Sorry? To call para 2, pay policy with recommendations. Does anybody wish to speak on the pay policy?
Thank you. Only to say that in the in 5 it says that the report, of course, is not subject to consultation. I presume this means that it hasn't changed from last year. I have no idea if it does or not. And it says the Council has a duty to consult employees and trade unions whenever it proposes to amend the existing policy. I don't see that it says that there are changes or no changes, and I would have liked to have heard something wider from the trade union. Incidentally, I am a member of Unison, but I do not attend any of their meetings because I have a conflict. I would have a conflict of interest otherwise. But given that we have a trade union here, I would have liked to have heard a bit more about what they think, how were they consulted, if they were consulted. Did anybody talk to them at all about this report? Given that they've been mentioned, the report is not subject to consultation. As someone no longer sitting on the committee, I would wonder what that meant. So for that reason, I think we will abstain on this because we don't know what the trade union thinks, and they represent quite a few of our workforce at the Town Hall, I believe.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Ms Mayor, I'm a bit confused. The pay policies for councillors? No? Ah, right, okay. Paragraph 3 is your land scheme. Apologies.
Paragraph 2, pay policy.
Yeah.
Okay, so is a recommendation that paragraph 2.2 adopted? Abstain, okay. I call paragraph 3, members' allowance scheme with recommendations. Does anybody wish to speak to this? Okay, are the recommendations in paragraph 3.2 adopted? Call paragraph 4, changes to the contract regulations with recommendations. Would any member like to speak to this? At the conclusion of the debate, is the recommendation in paragraph 4.2 adopted? Adopted, I think you mean. Reports from select committees. Item 10. Report of the Family Services Select Committee. I call upon Councillor Evans to formally move and Councillor Williams to formally second.
I beg to move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
I beg to second.
Thank you. Councillor Evans, do you wish to say anything in introduction?
I do. But first, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor for the wonderful art they provide here. It has been amazing to see the art from the community representing the diversity of the borough, and even showing very small groups that have immigrated to our borough, and it has made me happy. I love seeing young people's art
and new artists, and I thank you for that. Now I shall begin. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity this evening to present to you and to all members, as Chair of the Family Services Select Committee, the report and recommendations result of a review undertaken by the Select Committee and agreed at our meeting at the 3rd of February. We are lucky in our Select Committee. We have been able to draw upon the depth and breadth of expertise of our co-optees. This evening, I'm presenting to you the results of a working group led by co-optee Richard Derricky. This report, his working group excelled in their careful examination of a salient and sensitive issue, the ordeal of domestic abuse and what happened during the pandemic. As Richard Derricky so poignantly, and he points out, where there is domestic abuse in a household, the children are always victims and not just witnesses. This is a very important point. Too often, support for children is a bolt-on to existing domestic abuse services. This report sets out key learnings from our review and a set of recommendations that we hope will deliver better support for those children and young people who find themselves in such a dark and difficult situation, as happened during the pandemic. Hence, we are making a number of recommendations to our lead members, our lead for Family and Children's Services, and for Community Safety, Culture and Leisure, and to the Northwest London Clinical Commissioning Group to ensure, for instance, that 1, ensure that the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, known as MARAC, works as effectively as possible. 2, ensure domestic abuse cases affecting children during the pandemic have not been missed. 3, ensure there is excellent support in place for schools when they are themselves supporting children and parents affected by domestic abuse. 4, ensure, and particularly, that specific therapeutic services are provided to children affected by domestic abuse in RBKC. At the time that leading national children's charities are requesting that local committees and authorities have a statutory duty to provide specialist therapeutic services in the community, RBKC are demonstrating to be ahead of the curve, and we are providing lead members and the Council an opportunity to demonstrate true leadership for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson, do you wish to speak? Okay.
Yeah, you go.
I'm speaking only, I'm rising only to recommend this report to the entire council. And without going too far off the topic, it does seem to me that one of the problems we have at the moment is that the scrutiny committee's papers are not brought to full council as often as they should be. There's an awful lot of information in this paper which is relevant to councillors who don't serve on the committees
not even put on
that is relevant to councillors who don't serve on these committees. And I'd also like to draw attention to the role played by schools in supporting children who are the victims of domestic abuse. And to remind this council that actually our schools don't just educate as in book learning, they actually, when they work properly, support families, and families are more inclined to turn to schools than they are, because they trust them, than they do to other organisations and institutions. So I think our schools are to be commended for doing that and need to be given the resources to carry on with that work. I would draw attention also to this Operation Encompass, which is where the police, when the police have been called to domestic abuse, they quietly give information to the schools. And the schools are themselves very grateful for this, because it means that the schools know what is going on in a timely manner and can continue to support. So, as I say, I recommend the report. I recommend that more of these types of reports are brought back to the Council during the course of the year, and we should also get out of the silos and look at what else is happening. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I wish to join Councillor Evans in congratulating the co-opted members of the committee who produced this report, and thank them for their invaluable contribution to their scrutiny work, our scrutiny work. But I don't want to say anything more in detail about the report. I want to talk more generally about scrutiny. I agree with Councillor Atkinson. We ought to bring more reports from scrutiny, from the work of the scrutiny committees, select committees, to the Council. I think you should in future hopefully see more of reports like this and perhaps fewer motions. Certainly, but under the older arrangements, we did get more reporting from scrutiny. But what I wanted to, my final point is implementation. It is absolutely vital. I don't think it's the role for this council, the full council, but that the select committees and the OSC do monitor implementation. And it's particularly important, I think, where you're talking about external bodies. Even if we can't force them to do what we think they should be doing, at least we can hold them to account. But if you don't return to the subject and get a proper response, that won't happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Will, we are approaching 9:30, so can we...
I will be brief. Thank you. I just wanted to thank Councillor Evans and her committee for the work they've done on this. This is very important work. I would urge everybody to read this report, and I and Councillor Rendell will obviously look at the very sensible recommendations they have come up with. I know Mr Derecki very well. We're very lucky to have him on our committee, and I thank him and the other co-opted members as well. I recently sat in on one of our Marek meetings, and the level of attention and detail that and the number of different agencies and people working to try and support these cases is quite extraordinary. It is very, very complicated, but it is we cannot ever not focus on this, because, as this report says, the damage to our children is absolutely inestimable, and some of the stuff that goes on, as we are now seeing, is just shocking and terrible. So please, everyone, do read this and do familiarise yourself with this work. And also, I should mention, we've just refreshed our strategy on violence against women and girls, which obviously feeds into this as well. So thanks again for this.
Thank you very much. Councillor Evans, you're entitled to sum up, but...
I will do it very quickly.
Come on then. Yeah, please.
Okay. Let's time it. I'll try for a minute. How's that? I ask council members that they agree the recommendation in this report and refer the report to Councillor Josh Rendell, lead member for Family and Children's Services, Councillor Emma Will, the lead member for Community Safety, Culture and Leisure, and to North West London Clinical Commissioning Group. I look forward to receiving a written response to the report's recommendations from the lead members and health partners in due time. Not only have we worked hard to make recommendations that improve the life of children affected by domestic abuse, but the committee has also been busy reviewing serious youth violence under the lead of Councillor Dorian. And Councillor Williams is finalizing his review on mental health in North Kensington, where he was our liaison with the Adult Social Care and Health Select Committee. And I'd like to thank officers and for their help, both in scrutiny and in the family services. We will also soon be deciding on a new plan of work for the forthcoming year. Grenfell remains our priority.
Councillor Evans, have you finished? Councillor Evans, have you finished?
Swearing. We can see how the pressures and challenges posed by the pandemic and by continuous conflicts abroad These are affecting our families, children, and communities, with a special attention to the evacuees from Afghanistan and the refugees who will be coming from Ukraine and the Balkan states.
Thank you.
I would like to invite all members, all residents attending and watching at home to please tell us what you think we should be scrutinizing for next year, and speak to your councillors, check out our website, or write to us at scrutiny@rbkc.gov.uk. An investment in children gives returns for life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are the recommendations in para 2 adopted? Thank you. We are now approaching 9:30. I would like to do the standing order 11s. Whips, two sides. Are you happy to extend by 10 minutes? Councillor Salsitis and Councillor Mason, extend the meeting by 10 minutes to do the standing order 11s. Yeah, but that's what I'm asking, yes. Yeah. So, Councillor Rendell. We now move to standing order 11. Does any member wish to raise a matter under standing order 11 and speak for up to 2 minutes? Okay, Councillor Rendell first. Thank you. I've just said yes. Councillor Rendell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be brief as possible. Mr. Mayor, I wish to raise a matter of local concern regarding the future of Holland Park School. On behalf of the council and parents, I'm very disappointed that not a single trustee, governor, or staff member attended the parents' meeting on Monday night, attended with over 100 people present. In light of the school not communicating their current thoughts on what their current mat options are, myself and parents wish to reflect this view. We remain of the view that the best multi-academy trust to overtake Holland Park School is a local one. A school that is both geographically close with shared values. Kensington Aldridge Academy and Holland Park School are partners and key players within Kensington and Chelsea, and are only 20-minute walk from each other. This means they can be easily deploy flexible staff, pool resources, and create shared services to create local need. Of course, Mr. Mayor, KAA and both Holland Park is not a normal school. Both are outstanding. Ofsted noted that KAA's leaders, staff, and governors have, and I quote, the highest ambitions for pupils, noting that what the school have achieved and sustained is remarkable.
Time, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just conclude that this council, once again, supports the KAA option for Holland Park School and is disappointed with the current position of the trustees. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakeman.
You continue not to comprehend the fact that there are two entirely different groups of traumatised residents, the survivors and bereaved families, and also the wider community of Nottingdale and parts of St Helens, or that they have different and sometimes conflicting requirements. You also fail to understand that just putting the word Grenfell in front of new initiatives does not address your alleged priority of Grenfell recovery. Despite the all-too-fast consultation that took place after the tragedy, or atrocity as some members call it, this council is rapidly reverting to type, apart from a few additional sops tossed to the community around Grenfell Tower. I attended a number of the consultation meetings and had hoped to see the interests of local residents represented. Sadly, many of their concerns did just not appear reported. For example, not just the massive crisis in housing, especially social housing, but also the crisis in the effects of trauma on the health and well-being of all members of the local community. I am afraid that building more mainly tower blocks of inadequate housing for overcrowded families and people with mental health issues but no ongoing support in our few green spaces in North Kensington, many within the site of remains of Grenfell Tower, will only exacerbate current problems, not resolve them. The Grenfell Assembly is clearly a failure. Holding the most recent one outside the Grenfell community says says much. I recognise that Almanar continues to do excellent work with many of our traumatised communities, but it is not immediately local to the Tower. Many of the survivors and bereaved families are also no longer locally based. I understand that a number of your mainly newer Tory councillors have done what they can to contribute to the recovery, but this is all within their own perceptions, which are very different from those residents in the Grenfell area. There needs to be a far greater focus on the traumatised locality. How about starting by renaming the Grenfell Assembly and restoring some form of dedicated and proper scrutiny of the Grenfell recovery? Listen to your residents. Stop imposing your decisions on them, which is what you promised at the 17th of July to do.
Councillor Thalasides. Councillor Thalasides.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll try to be brief, as I know that economy with language is as important as financial management. I want to talk about something that's come up a few times already tonight, quite rightly, particularly as a ward councillor for Holland, where the Ukrainian embassy is cited, and across the road from the Ukrainian Social Club, which Councillor Aresi and I visited at the weekend to speak to some of the community there. As ward councillors, and particularly on behalf of this entire chamber, I'm sure, we want to, and I certainly want to, send our strongest possible support to the Ukrainian community, to welcome the actions taken by the council leadership to offer that practical support to people who have been affected, and to say that whilst we certainly want everybody in this community and across the borough to feel welcome, Russians and Ukrainians alike, we condemn the actions of Vladimir Putin and the Russian military in their invasion, which is wholly wrong, and that none of us here condone.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett. Councillor Bennett and then Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to raise a matter that has caused significant frustration to the residents of Redcliffe Ward, and I'm sure many other residents across the borough, and that is the network-wide industrial action that has taken place on all the TfL tube lines yesterday and then planned again for tomorrow. It's estimated, Mr. Mayor, that this costs the London economy £50 million per day, a significant portion of which will fall within our borough. But beyond economic hurt, it also obviously affects people trying to get to doctor's appointments and hospital appointments, people trying to meet up with their friends, people trying to partake in social activities and cultural activities. As an aside, I will say there's also knock-on effects this morning, which a humble councillor for Redcliffe only found out at 7 a.m. at Gloucester Road Tube Station and had to quickly get a Santander cycle the whole way across London to Euston Station. Yeah, Boris Pike, indeed. It probably did him good, but the other costs are very real. This obviously comes at the worst possible time, just as businesses are recovering from the pandemic, starting to get people through their doors again. The London Mayor said when he was elected, quite rightly, that strikes are a sign of failure. He also promised us 0 days of strikes under his mayoralty. Since then, we've had 52 days of strikes, more in just 6 years. In just 6 years, which is more than 16 years more than the number of strikes we had in 16 years under both Mayor Johnson and Mayor Livingston.
Can we just have a bit of respect? Councillor Bennett, please carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I say, this causes us in this. Okay, this causes my residents. This causes residents in Redcliffe.
I do expect Councillor Parliament a bit of respect. Just hang on, Mr. Councillor Bennett.
Yeah.
At the last council meeting, we proposed a motion by the Labour side to be respectful to fellow members of this council. Can I ask you to live up to it right across the chamber, please? Councillor Bennett, you will finish your 2 minutes.
Yes. Mr. Mayor, I call on...
Councillor Blakeman, please. You have been in this council long enough to know a bit about respect. Can you show it in the final few minutes of your time here, please? Councillor Bennett.
Mr. Mayor, I will finish very quickly.
Stand up. Halt, please. I really do find that applauding very completely counter to what you proposed at the last council meeting. You either live by your motions or you don't. Councillor Bennett, carry on.
Mr Mayor, I will finish very quickly. I call on the council leadership to do whatever they can to hold the London Mayor to account for the economic, social and health consequences that this industrial action has brought to our residents.
Councillor Mills. Councillor Mills.
Far be it from me to side on a final note. I raised it earlier in the informal part of the proceedings, and Councillor Thalasitis has also talked about it. But I come armed, Councillor Lindsay and I, on behalf of Norland, with emails from the people in the Ukrainian centre, and this is particularly as Ms Harris was not with us before, to ask you if you could perhaps restrain some of your enthusiastic traffic wardens who are busy down there giving lots of tickets, in some cases I'm told erroneously, but perhaps just a supporting gesture really, if you might perhaps make contact, and certainly Councillor Lindsay and I can give you the names of the administrators, because they really would like some help with how to manage the highway logistics, if I could put it like that. Last night when I was there, there were, I can't tell you how many cars, I'm sure Councillor Round can attest to this, Sheila's round the corner, dropping clothes off. It was so like Grenfell, it was quite frightening. And again, we were not there. We, the administration, I mean, not the community. The community is there. Those of us who live up there will know. Perhaps officers might use this occasion to go down there and see what assistance we can give them at local government level, if I may. The second plea that I've had, and I know that we can't help with this necessarily in this chamber, it's beyond our pay grade, so to speak, but they are asking for ambulances. They're saying they're getting lots of, you know, we had 10 warehouses, didn't we? More senior or more longer serving officers will remember, 10 warehouses of people emptying their clothes. They don't want that now. They don't want second-hand clothes like we did with Grenfell. They want new socks. They need helmets for their soldiers. They need money, and they also need really a sense that we're not just doing the usual nodding, but we're actually making some real difference on the ground. The Ukrainian Centre is in the Norland ward. The statue of the saint is in your ward. Johnny, I'm correcting that for Councillor Palmer here. But also Father William, your padre, Mr Mayor, told me earlier that they are a collecting point as well. So can we at least at Kensington and Chelsea for the Norland ward organise a little bit of a better coordinated response than perhaps we did on June the 14th, nearly 5 years ago?
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And Councillor...
Here, here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we are coming to the end of this meeting. There are motions on the agenda. I suggest that the motions are moved over to the next council meeting. But we do need on motion 2 just to agree that it's withdrawn. So on motion 2, I gather that Councillor Rendell wishes to withdraw the motion as a matter has been dealt with.
That's correct.
Council approves the withdrawal of that motion. Thank you very much. So, members of the council, as we come to the end of this council meeting, many of you know that after 36 years' service to the council, Martin Carver is retiring on Friday.
I don't think we should let him leave, Mr Mayor. Put him in the,
Martin,
in the turret.
I was going to say a few words, but I don't think I need to. I think that said it all. So I haven't actually done appointments, but I don't think there are any appointments standing your names. So this concludes the council business for this evening. And once again, to all those councillors standing down, we thank you for your service and we give you the very best wishes for the future. The next meeting of the Council is scheduled to be annual meeting at 6:30 on Wednesday, the 25th of May. Thank you all very much at the conclusion of this municipal cycle. Thank you.